Pickle, Tickle. Chapter 1. Francine called on a Friday morning before he'd finished his first Yingling, which meant something was already in motion, and she'd decided he was the right instrument for it. He was on the stern of the severance package, watching a man on the dock 2 slips down argue with his boat's GPS unit, which had apparently decided that Cedar Key City Marina was in the Bahamas and was refusing to revise its position. The man had the specific, hunched intensity of someone trying to reason with a machine that had no capacity for reason and knew it, and Pete was watching him from the piling with the focused amber-eyed attention of a creature that found human disagreements with technology to be among the more interesting things the dock produced. "Tell me you've eaten," Francine said. "I'm about to," he said. He was not about to. He had a Yingling, and the composition book open to a page with nothing on it, and a Friday morning that had been offering itself as a day of low ambition. "There's a woman in Sarasota," Francine said. "Her name is Vivian Caswell. Her husband died 9 days ago on a pickleball court in the middle of a point. That's a specific way to go. He was winning. 3 sets up, 2 games in, killing a man 20 years younger on the other side of the net, and then he wasn't doing anything anymore." A pause. "The medical examiner says cardiac event. The man had a known mitral valve condition, nothing severe, managed, monitored for years. The ME isn't looking for anything else. But Vivian is. Vivian says Howard had been training like a college athlete for the last 8 months. New diet, new workout routine, new everything. Said he looked better at 71 than he had at 65. He heard her lean back in her chair. She also says he'd been different. Winning things he shouldn't have been winning. Moving in ways a man with a managed valve condition shouldn't have been moving." Gumbo looked at the composition book. "Acting weird and winning too much," he said. "Those are very nearly Vivian's words." He wrote them down anyway. Acting weird and winning too much. He looked at it. Where was this? Seaview Palms. It's a 55-plus community in Osprey that's just south of Sarasota on the Tamiami Trail. About 600 units, resident membership model, full amenities. 3 pools, 12 pickleball courts, a fitness center, a wellness program. A brief pause that had something specific in it. The wellness program is run by a man named Chad Barbieri. 29 years old, certified personal trainer, been at Seaview Palms for 14 months. How certified? The certification is legitimate. The program he's been running is, she paused again. That's what Vivian wants to know about. He looked at Pete, who had decided the GPS man was no longer interesting, and had returned his attention to the harbor in the manner of a creature with finite patience for repetitive human behavior. The GPS man was still at it. The GPS was unmoved. "Medical examiner cleared it," Gumbo said. "What's the theory?" Vivian doesn't have a theory. She has a feeling, and she has a husband who was doing something with his body for 8 months that she didn't understand, and now he's in the ground and she wants to understand it. A pause. She also has a neighbor who was in the same wellness program, who came to her last week and told her his doctor found something in his blood panel that shouldn't be there. Gumbo wrote, blood panel. Something that shouldn't be there. What kind of something? The neighbor isn't sure. His doctor flagged it and referred him to a specialist, and the neighbor, his name is Arnie, I don't have the last name yet, told Vivian about it because Vivian is the kind of woman people tell things to. Francine paused. She sounds like someone who's used to being right about things and being told she's wrong. That's a specific type, he said. It's a useful type, Francine said. When they're actually right. He looked at the composition book. He wrote Seaview Palms, Osprey. Chad Barbieri, Wellness Director, 14 months. Arnie, no last name, blood panel, specialist referral. Howard Caswell, 71, dead 9 days, mitral valve condition. He drew a line under the list and looked at it. 55-plus community, he said. How do I get in? Seaview Palms has a 3-day prospective resident visit program. You schedule through the sales office. They put you in a furnished guest unit and give you full access to the amenities. A pause. I've been told the pickleball courts fill up by 8 a.m. You'd need to bring appropriate footwear. I don't own appropriate footwear. Then buy some. She paused. You're 54. I know how old I am. You'd fit the demographic. I'm not buying pickleball shoes. They're court shoes, Gumbo. They look like regular shoes. He was quiet for a moment. On the dock, the GPS man had apparently achieved some form of resolution. Either the machine had located itself correctly, or the man had accepted that it wouldn't and had moved on. He was walking back toward the parking lot, with the defeated posture of someone who had learned something about the limits of technology and found the lesson expensive. Vivian Caswell, he said. Tell me about her. 70. Sharp. She ran the development department of a private university in Connecticut for 22 years, foundation work, donor relations, major gifts. She moved to Seaview Palms with Howard 4 years ago when he retired from his surgical practice. A pause. He was a thoracic surgeon. Retired at 67. 2 years of just having time. Then the pickleball. Then Chad Barbieri's wellness program. Then Howard, becoming a different version of himself. Different how? Competitive in a way he hadn't been. Secretive. The particular secretiveness of someone who has found a thing that works and doesn't want to share it or explain it or have it questioned. She paused. Vivian said she asked him about the program twice, and both times he said it was nothing, just some supplements, some training techniques. She said the word supplements had a specific quality when he said it. What quality? She said it sounded like a word covering something else. Francine paused. She's a development director. 22 years of people telling her things that covered something else. She knows the sound. He wrote supplements. Covering something. He underlined it and put a question mark. She wants to know what killed her husband. She wants to know if what killed her husband is still happening to other people, Francine said. Arnie's blood panel is one data point. She thinks there are more. He looked at the composition book. He looked at the harbor. He looked at Pete, who had decided on a fish and was watching the water with the complete, settled patience of a creature that had done this calculation 1,000 times and knew exactly what the math produced. Day rate plus expenses, he said. She'll pay it. A pause. I'll text you her contact. Call before noon, she's a morning person. Francine. What? The pickleball shoes. Buy them, Gumbo. She hung up. He called Vivian Caswell at 11:15 from the stern. The composition book opened and the second Yingling opened because the first one was done, and it was the kind of Friday that appeared to be generating its own momentum. She picked up on the first ring with the alert promptness of someone who had been waiting for it. Mr. Malone. Her voice was a Connecticut voice, the careful vowels of a region that had decided how words should sound and stuck with it, but with a Florida overlay now, the delivery slightly looser, the pace adjusted for a climate that punished urgency. Francine said you'd call. Tell me about Howard, he said. Not the case. Not the investigation. Howard. A brief pause, the recognition of an approach. He was a good man with a competitive streak he'd spent 60 years pretending he didn't have. She said it with the warmth of someone who had known a person long enough that their edges were just features. He was a thoracic surgeon for 39 years. Surgery is competitive in ways people don't discuss in public. Who does the hard cases, who gets the complex referrals, who the residents want to scrub with. Howard was always at the front of that line, and always acted like it didn't matter to him. And then he retired. And then he retired. And the competition went away. And he spent 2 years being very pleasant about not having any. She paused. We moved here, and he found pickleball, and for 6 months it was just recreation. He wasn't good at it immediately, and he was fine with that in the way of a man who is being fine with something he isn't fine with. Another pause. Then Chad Barbieri started the wellness program. 14 months ago. 14 months ago. Howard went to the introductory session because our neighbor Glenn dragged him. Glenn, who has done every wellness program at every community he's ever lived in, and still smokes half a pack on his back patio every night. She said this without the meanness that would have made it less true. Howard came home from that first session and said nothing which was significant. Howard had an opinion about everything. He came home and didn't say anything about it. He went back. He went back the next morning. And the morning after. Within 2 weeks, he was there every day at 6 a.m., which was not a habit Howard had ever formed in 67 years of otherwise successful living. She paused. The first month, I thought it was wonderful. He had energy. He was sleeping better. He lost 8 pounds. I told my daughter in Hartford that Howard had found his thing. And after the first month, it stopped being wellness and started being something else. Something more specific. He was talking to Chad outside the program, private sessions, texts on his phone that he angled away from me. He was taking things. I don't know what exactly. There were bottles in the bathroom cabinet that weren't there before and then weren't there anymore. She stopped. I asked him twice. He said supplements. He said it the way he used to say in surgery when he meant it went well, but it was complicated. Gumbo wrote in the composition book, Howard, 71, thoracic surgeon, competitive, 6 a.m. sessions, private texts with Chad, supplement bottles, didn't want to explain. Did the ME run a talk screen? Standard screen, yes. Nothing flagged. I've been told a standard screen doesn't catch everything. She paused. I've been told this by Arnie's doctor, who said this carefully, in the way doctors say things they want you to understand without appearing to be saying them. What did Arnie's blood panel show? Arnie is Arnold Lipscomb. He's 73, he lives 4 doors down, and his doctor found elevated IGF-1 levels. Do you know what that is? Gumbo wrote, IGF-1. Tell me. Insulin-like growth factor 1. It's a hormone that mediates the effects of human growth hormone. Elevated levels in a 73-year-old man with no clinical reason for elevation suggest exogenous human growth hormone administration. She delivered this with the clean precision of a woman who had done her research and organized it. In plain language, it suggests Arnie has been taking HGH, which is not something his doctor prescribed and not something he bought at a pharmacy. Has Arnie told you this himself? Arnie told me his doctor was concerned and referred him. He didn't use the phrase human growth hormone. He said the doctor found something and it was being looked at. I did the research myself. A pause. I was a development director for 22 years. I did a lot of research. He looked at his notes. IGF-1, HGH, Arnie Lipscomb, 73 doors down. He looked at the line above it. Supplement bottles. Didn't want to explain. What was Howard winning, he said. A brief pause. Everything, she said. The Tuesday tournament. The Thursday ladder. The championship bracket in September. He'd never won it in 3 previous years, and this year he won it without dropping a set. Another pause. There's a man at Seaview Palms named Gerald Fitch, who has been the top-ranked player in the community for 6 years. He's 61 and plays every day, and he trains in the off-season in Arizona. He's very serious. She paused. Howard beat him in the final 6-2, 6-1. Gerald did not take it graciously. How ungraciously? He told 3 people within earshot that Howard was cheating. He didn't use that word. He said Howard's physicality had changed in ways that were inconsistent with natural aging. She paused. Gerald is a retired pharmacist. He said it with the vocabulary of a retired pharmacist. Gumbo underlined Gerald Fitch. Retired pharmacist. The man who knew the vocabulary and had used it in public. That was a thread. I'll need to come to Seaview Palms, he said. Prospective resident visit. 3 days. I know about the program, she said. I can't call the sales office on your behalf without it appearing I've arranged something. You'd need to call yourself. I'll call this afternoon. One thing, my cover is prospective resident. You don't know me. If we pass each other on the grounds we're strangers. A pause. I've been doing donor work for 22 years, she said. I know how to not know someone. Good. He looked at the composition book. The pickleball. Do they have equipment you can borrow on the courts? Loaner paddles at the court desk, she said. Why? Because I don't play pickleball. A pause that had more in it than a pause should. Mr. Malone. Everyone at Seaview Palms plays pickleball. Even the people who don't play pickleball play pickleball. I'll figure it out. You should watch some videos first. I'll figure it out, he said again, with slightly more confidence than he had any right to. She made a sound that was not quite a laugh, and not quite a sigh, and was probably both, filtered through the composure of a woman who had spent 40 years managing situations that were more difficult than this one. He drove to Sarasota on Sunday. He'd spent Saturday on the research, which had taken 2 hours with the laptop on the stern table, and Pete present in a supervisory capacity. The research had produced the following. Seaview Palms Osprey, 587 units, WA fees $625 per month. Master Plan 1994, fully built out 2003, waiting list for resale units currently running 14 months. Amenities included a 12,000 square foot fitness center, 3 pools including 1 lap, 12 dedicated pickleball courts with lighting, 2 clay tennis courts that appeared largely ornamental based on the community newsletter photo archive, a restaurant called The Lanai that served lunch and dinner Tuesday through Sunday, a cafe called Perks that opened at 6 a.m. for the early exercisers, and the Seaview Palms Wellness Center, which was the dedicated space for Chad Barbieri's program. Chad Barbieri had a public Instagram presence with 4,200 followers, which was less than influencer territory, and more than someone who posted for fun. The account was at @chadfit_SWFL, and it featured Chad in various states of physical demonstration, exercises, meal prep, motivational text overlays, and a rotating cast of community members at various stages of fitness improvement. Gumbo went through the last 6 months of posts. Howard Caswell appeared in 3 of them, tagged as @HowardCaswell71, which Howard had apparently created specifically for this purpose, and in each photograph he looked the way Vivian had described, better. Not just thinner. Different, in the structural way that suggested the body had been given instructions it had followed. He also found Arnold Lipscomb in 2 posts, a woman named Patricia something and several, and a man whose account said, @GeraldFitch_Osprey and exactly 0, which told Gumbo something about Gerald Fitch's assessment of Chad Barbieri before Gerald Fitch's retired pharmacist's vocabulary had given it to him directly. He looked up HGH and EPO because the research required it. Human growth hormone, increased muscle mass, reduced body fat, improved exercise capacity, not approved for anti-aging use, not a standard tox screen item, elevated IGF-1 as a blood marker. EPO, erythropoietin, increases red blood cell production, improves aerobic capacity used in endurance sports doping, associated with cardiovascular risk in people with pre-existing cardiac conditions. He looked at that last phrase for a while. Associated with cardiovascular risk in people with pre-existing cardiac conditions. Howard Caswell had a pre-existing cardiac condition. A managed mitral valve issue, nothing severe. Managed was a word that lived in the gap between fine and not fine, and required regular visits to the gap to stay on the right side of it. He closed the laptop. He called Francine. EPO, he said. Yes, she said. I was going to call you about that. The cardiovascular risk in people with pre-existing conditions. I spoke to a sports medicine physician this morning who consults for a Florida Cycling Federation. Off the record. She paused. He said EPO, in an older patient with any kind of cardiac history, is a specific risk profile. It thickens the blood. It increases clotting potential. In combination with the physiological stress of competitive play. A mitral valve defect that was managed becomes something different. He said, it's consistent with the presentation. He said he couldn't say that on the record about a specific case, but he said it was consistent. He looked at the composition book, at the notes on Howard Caswell, and the September championship, and Gerald Fitch saying Howard's physicality had changed in ways that were inconsistent with natural aging. The Me's standard screen, he said, wouldn't catch EPO. It's a peptide hormone. Standard tox screens don't include it. Specific testing for erythropoietin requires a urine sample run through a specific assay that no Florida County Medical Examiner's office runs routinely. Can it still be tested? Only if the Me's office retained biological samples, which they may or may not have done, on what appeared to be a natural death with a documented cardiac history. She paused. Vivian would need to formally request additional testing, which is a different conversation than the one we're currently having. One thing at a time, he said. I'm going in Monday morning. Don't get on the pickleball courts the first day, she said. Observe. Get the lay of the land. I know how to do this, he said. I know you know how to do this. I'm saying, don't let the pickleball enthusiasm pull you onto a court before you're ready. I'm not going to get pulled onto a pickleball court, he said. He bought court shoes at a sporting goods store in Chiefland on the drive up, because Francine was right about the shoes, even if she didn't need to know that. The Seaview Palms sales office was on the North Entrance Boulevard, a standalone building with a waterfall feature in the lobby that was presumably meant to convey the relationship between the community and the natural water features of the Osprey area, and primarily conveyed that someone had a waterfall budget. The sales representative who met him was named Tiffany, who was 32, and had the specific professional warmth of someone whose job was to make strangers feel like they'd already decided to buy something and simply hadn't signed yet. He'd called Saturday afternoon and given his name. Gumbo Malone, Columbus, Ohio, recently retired, divorced, considering the area, which was true in 4 out of 5 particulars and sufficiently true overall. He was in the guest unit by 11 Monday morning. The guest unit was a ground-floor 2-bedroom with a screened lanai overlooking one of the community's smaller retention ponds, furnished in the specific neutral palette of spaces designed to suggest a life without committing to one. He put his bag in the bedroom, hung the blue marlins in the closet, sat on the lanai, and looked at the retention pond. There was a turtle on the bank. A gopher tortoise, technically, which was not a water turtle, but had apparently found the retention pond bank an acceptable location, and was doing what gopher tortoises did, which was exist with a completeness that made everything around them seem provisional. He opened the composition book and wrote the date and the address and looked at what he knew. He needed 4 things. First, Chad Barbieri, in enough of a professional context to understand what the wellness program actually delivered versus what it said it delivered. Second, Arnold Lipscomb, to understand what Arnie actually knew about his own blood panel and how it connected to the program. Third, Gerald Fitch, who had the vocabulary and the grievance, and who might have been watching the thing Gumbo needed someone to have been watching. Fourth, the wellness center itself, specifically the pool shed, specifically because wellness directors who were running pharmaceutical programs out of communities kept the pharmaceuticals somewhere. And Gumbo had spent 28 years in procurement learning that everything got stored somewhere, and the storage told you more than the product did. He was working through the order of operations when his lanai screen door opened and a man put his head in. He was 73, thick-set, wearing pickleball clothes, the compression shorts, and the moisture-wicking shirt, with the slightly damp quality of someone who had been on a court recently and hadn't fully cooled down. He had a broad face that had been in the Florida sun long enough to make its position clear, and small dark eyes that were doing a rapid and not entirely subtle assessment of Gumbo and the composition book and the guest unit's open interior. "You're the new prospective," he said. It wasn't a question. "Gumbo Malone," Gumbo said. He didn't stand. "Arnie Lipscomb." He pushed the screen door open and came onto the lanai and sat in the other chair without being invited, with the ease of a man who had decided that the guest unit lanai was a semi-public space, and he had as much right to it as anyone. "Word travels fast. I just got in." "Tiffany texts the neighborhood captains," Arnie said. "There's a whole system." He looked at the composition book. "You a writer?" "No," Gumbo said. "Old habit." Arnie looked at the retention pond. At the gopher tortoise. He looked at Gumbo with the small dark eyes still doing their assessment. "You play pickleball." "What else?" "I'm more of a," he looked at the pond, "observer." "You'll play," Arnie said with the certainty of a man who had watched every prospective resident resist pickleball and eventually succumb to it. "They all say that." "How long have you lived here?" 6 years. "Best decision I ever made." He said it with enough conviction that it was probably true, and enough emphasis that it was also covering something. "My wife Elaine died 3 years in. I stayed." "The community," he looked at the pond. "It's what it is." "The wellness program," Gumbo said. Casually. Just filling a silence. Arnie's face moved. The eyes went somewhere and came back. "You heard about it already." "The sales brochure mentioned it," Gumbo said. Which was true. The brochure had a full page on the Seaview Palms Wellness Center, including a photograph of a man who was identifiably Chad Barbieri without being named, in a training posture that suggested capability without promising anything specific. "It's good," Arnie said. He said it the way Howard Caswell had said supplements, according to Vivian. A word covering something else. "Chad knows his stuff." "What kind of stuff?" "Fitness. Recovery. The whole approach." He stopped. "It's more than what most of these places do. Usually the wellness program is some 60-year-old walking you through a stretch routine you could find on YouTube. But Chad's different." "Chad is," he stopped. His jaw worked slightly. "Chad gets results." He said results the same way he'd said good. as if both words were actually longer words that he'd trimmed to fit the conversation. Gumbo looked at the gopher tortoise, which had not moved. "I was talking to someone before I drove down," he said. "They mentioned a man here who died recently. On the courts." The air on the lanai changed. Arnie was quiet for a moment. "Howard Caswell," he said. 9 days ago. Heart thing. Did you know him?" Howard was. Arnie looked at the pond. "Howard and I were in the program together. Same cohort, same sessions. He stopped again. He was a good guy. Competitive. Very good player. Were you close?" "Close enough." He looked at his hands. They were large hands, the hands of a man who had worked with them before he'd retired. And they were sitting still on his knees with the deliberate stillness of hands belonging to a man trying not to betray something. "I went to the visitation. Vivian was." He stopped. "She held up well." Gumbo looked at him. At the hands. At the jaw that kept doing its small working motion. "Arnie," he said. Arnie looked at him. "You came over here because Tiffany texted the neighborhood captain," he said. "But you came over here fast. I've been on this lanai for 20 minutes. Arnie held his look. The small dark eyes. "The doctor thing," Gumbo said. "The blood panel." Arnie went very still. "I'm not from the sales office," Gumbo said. "I'm a private investigator. I'm here because someone who loved Howard Caswell wants to understand what happened to him." He kept his voice level. "And I think you do too." The lanai was quiet. On the retention pond bank, the gopher tortoise had apparently decided something had changed in its environment and pulled itself to a slightly different position, which for a gopher tortoise was a significant act of responsiveness. "You know about the blood thing," Arnie said. Flat. Confirming, not asking. "I know about the IGF-1, Gumbo said. Arnie looked at the pond for a long moment. "The specialist told me it was elevated," he said. "Significantly elevated, for a man my age with no endogenous reason for it." He paused. "He asked me if I was taking anything. I said I was in the community wellness program." He paused. "He asked me to get him the full list of what the program had me taking. I called Chad." "What did Chad say?" "Chad said the program used proprietary supplement blends, and the formulations were protected for competitive reasons, and he couldn't share the full ingredient breakdown." Arnie looked at his hands. He said it very smoothly, like he'd been asked before. "And you dropped it." "I didn't know what to do with it." Arnie looked up. "I'm 73 years old. I was the best I'd felt in 10 years. I didn't want to pull that string." He stopped. "And then Howard died." The lanai held this. "And then Howard died," Gumbo said. "He was in the program longer than me. Deeper in it. The private sessions, the extra," he stopped. "There were levels. There were people in the program at different levels. Howard was at a level 1 wasn't." "What was at that level?" Arnie looked at him. "I don't know exactly," he said. "But the people at that level were winning things. Playing like they were 20 years younger." He paused. "And Howard's dead." Gumbo looked at the composition book. He'd been writing without fully tracking that he was writing, which was how it worked when a conversation was going fast. "The specialist appointment," he said. "Have you gone?" "Thursday of this week." "Tell me what he says." Arnie looked at him. "You're actually going to do something about this?" "That's what I'm paid for," Gumbo said. Arnie nodded once, the nod of a man who had been carrying something and was deciding whether to put it down. "The name Caswell," he said. "Vivian hired you." "I can't say who hired me." You don't have to, Arnie said. Vivian's the only person in this community who would do this. He looked at the pond. She loved that man. She thought he was doing something stupid, and she loved him anyway, and now he's gone, and she's doing the thing she always does, which is try to understand it. He paused. That's who Vivian Caswell is. Gumbo wrote nothing. He let the sentence land and stay where it was. What time does the wellness center open? He said. 6 a.m. Chad's there by 5:30. Arnie stood. He was a big man getting up from a low chair, and he did it with the controlled care of a man managing joints that had started offering opinions. Tomorrow morning, there's a group session at 7. That's where you'll see the full program. He looked at Gumbo. Come with me. I'll introduce you as a prospective. Chad loves perspectives. I'll bet he does, Gumbo said. Arnie went back through the screen door and walked up the path toward his unit 4 doors down, and Gumbo watched him go and then looked at the composition book. He wrote levels in the program. Howard, at a level Arnie wasn't. The people at that level were winning. Howard's dead. He looked at it. Under it he wrote, Chad loves perspectives. He looked at that too. He thought about Vivian Caswell in her unit somewhere in this community of 600, managing the particular grief of a woman who had been right about something and would rather have been wrong. He thought about Howard Caswell winning the September championship 6-2, 6-1 against a man who trained in Arizona. He thought about supplement bottles in a bathroom cabinet that appeared and disappeared. He closed the composition book. He needed to find the pool shed. But first, he needed to figure out what pickleball actually was, because Arnie had said 7 a.m. and Gumbo had 8 hours, and at least some of them should involve watching a YouTube video, because Francine was right about that too, even if she didn't need to know it. He opened the laptop. He typed how to play pickleball beginners into the search bar. Pete would have found this undignified. Pete wasn't here. The tortoise on the bank hadn't moved in 20 minutes and had no comment to offer. He watched the video. It was 11 minutes long, and by the end of it he understood the basic geometry of the thing, which was tennis crossed with ping pong played on a court the size of a bad decision. The ball was plastic and full of holes. The paddle was solid. There was a zone near the net called the kitchen that you couldn't enter under most circumstances, which felt like a metaphor for something, but he couldn't pin down what. He closed the laptop. He went to find dinner. Tomorrow at 7, he was going to meet Chad Barbieri, and he needed to arrive as someone Chad Barbieri would want to tell things to, which meant arriving as a man with money and time, and the mild athletic vanity of a prospective resident who had heard the wellness program got results. He was, with some creative application of the facts, exactly that. He left the tortoise to its evening and walked toward the Lanai restaurant and the particular business of becoming a version of himself that was useful. Chapter 2. Chad Barbieri was exactly what his Instagram account had suggested, and somehow more of it in person. 6 feet, built in the specific way of someone who had made his body his professional credential, and maintained that credential with the focused discipline of a man whose income depended on the visible argument. Dark hair cut close on the sides with some structure on top that suggested he'd thought about it. 31 in the face if you looked carefully, 24 if you didn't. He wore compression training gear in Seaview Palms green and white that had clearly been custom ordered with the community's branding, and that fit him in the way things fit people when fit is the point. He was running the 7 a.m. group session in the Wellness Center's main studio when Arnie brought Gumbo in at 6:58. 12 people in a circle, varying ages of the 55-plus demographic, varying levels of the kind of fitness that came from serious application rather than lucky genetics. Some of them looked the way people looked when they'd been working hard for a long time. Two of them, a man in his late 60s and a woman who might have been 70, looked the way people looked when they'd been given something extra. Chad saw them come in and did something specific with his face, the full attention welcome deployed like a spotlight, the kind of directed warmth that arrived fast and landed hard and made the recipient feel briefly singular. He crossed the studio in 8 steps. Arnie. Handshake. You brought a friend. Gumbo Malone. He's in the prospective unit on Crane Court. Chad's hand was already extended. The grip was the one Gumbo had expected. Calibrated, firm, held a beat past what the shake required. Gumbo. That's a name. It is, Gumbo agreed. Where are you coming from? Columbus. Retired. He gave Chad the version of himself he'd settled on at dinner the night before. Recently separated from a 28-year career in corporate logistics, the body showing the accumulated cost of that career, looking for a change. It was true in almost every particular, and the particulars it wasn't true in didn't show. Chad looked at him with the practiced assessment of a man who evaluated bodies professionally and had learned to do it without appearing to. What he was seeing, 6'1", 240, once athletic, now carrying a decade of desk, and the specific softness of someone whose competitive instincts had gone unused long enough to show. Gumbo knew exactly what Chad was seeing because he'd looked in the mirror before he drove up. You work out, Chad said. Not consistently, Gumbo said, which was honest. You play any sports? Currently or historically? Historically. High school football. Some intramural basketball in college. So the base is there, Chad said. He said it like a diagnosis. Not flattering exactly, but not discouraging. The assessment of a man who had turned a lot of unpromising raw material into results and found the process interesting. The program I run here is different from what most communities offer. I want to be upfront about that. We work with the whole system: training, nutrition, recovery. The results speak for themselves. He gestured toward the circle of 12. Most of these people came in where you are. Or worse. Worse than me, Gumbo said. No offense intended. None taken, Gumbo said. He looked at the circle. At the two who looked different. How long before you see results? Depends on the individual, the commitment level, and which tier of the program is the right fit. Chad looked at him. After the session, if you want to stay and talk, I can walk you through the options. Tiers, Gumbo said, with the mild curiosity of a man who has heard a word that interests him without wanting to appear too interested in it. Different clients have different goals, Chad said. The program is calibrated accordingly. He smiled, the clean professional smile of a man who had practiced it, until it conveyed exactly what he wanted it to convey and nothing more. Come watch the session. See what we do. He went back to the circle. Gumbo found a spot on the bench along the studio wall and sat and watched. The session was legitimately good. This was the first thing he wrote in the composition book when he got the chance, because it mattered and he didn't want to build the case on a false foundation. Whatever Chad Barbieri was doing additionally, the base program he ran in the studio was competent and thoughtful and clearly tailored to the specific physical realities of people in their 60s and 70s, the joint limitations, the recovery requirements, the difference between building capacity and accumulating damage. He worked the room with genuine attention, adjusting, coaching, noticing. The man in his late 60s, Gumbo had clocked at arrival, was named Don, and Don moved with the specific fluid efficiency of someone who had recently acquired capabilities his body hadn't had in years. Not the lurching effort of someone working hard, but the ease of someone who had already done the work and was now just expressing it. When the session reached a plyometric component, Gumbo wouldn't have expected a man in his late 60s to manage. Don managed it without apparent strain. The woman, who might have been 70, was named Patricia. She had the compact, precise movement of a former dancer. Gumbo would have assumed this without the way her feet found position automatically. And she moved through the session with a vitality that the word vitality barely covered. After the session, she caught Gumbo looking and gave him the specific smile of someone who had recently discovered something and was enjoying the discovery. "First time," she said. She was barely breathing hard. "Watching," he said. "I don't start until I know what I'm getting into." "Smart." She looked at the center of the room, where Chad was closing out the session. "This program it's the real thing. I was on my 3rd knee replacement waiting list when I started. 14 months later, I'm playing pickleball 6 days a week. That's significant. Significantly significant." She picked up her water bottle. "Don't let the age thing put you off. Whatever you think your ceiling is, this program puts it somewhere else." She paused. "I'm serious about the knee. I was measuring my life in steps to car distances before Chad." She went to her bag. Gumbo wrote in the composition book, "Patricia, former dancer. 14 months in program, knee issues pre-program, now playing 6x per week. Don, late 60s, plyometrics easy, fluid, not working hard." He looked at the 2 entries and thought about what Arnie had said. Levels in the program. People at a certain level winning things, moving differently. 14 months. Don's movement. Patricia's knee. He thought about what that amount of improvement in that time frame, in people that age, required physiologically. He thought about supplement bottles that appeared and disappeared. Chad Barbiere's office was a glass-walled room off the main studio that looked out over the equipment floor, the kind of visibility that said transparency without actually producing any. It had a desk, 2 chairs, a whiteboard on one wall with motivational language and program metrics, and a row of framed certifications. The certifications were real. Gumbo had looked up the credentialing bodies the previous night, and they were legitimate organizations with actual standards. Chad sat behind the desk with his hands loose on the surface, and his posture in the deliberate open position of someone who had been trained in trust-building body language and deployed it consistently. He had a tablet on the desk with a form open, the intake questionnaire, Gumbo gathered. Personalized. Calibrated. "Tell me about your health history," Chad said. "Anything relevant, cardiac, joint issues, blood pressure, medications." "Blood pressure is managed," Gumbo said. "Nothing cardiac. Left knee has been complaining for about 3 years. Had a shoulder thing in my 40s that mostly resolved." He paused. "The usual cost of 54 years. Managed blood pressure on medication?" "One thing. Amlodipine. Been on it 6 years." Chad wrote something on the tablet. He asked about diet, sleep, stress levels. The last question, delivered with the careful openness of someone who understood that retired men in their 50s frequently had significant stress they hadn't processed and needed a neutral door to walk through. Gumbo gave him a version of the truth that was close enough to be credible and far enough from complete to be useful. "What are your goals?" Chad said. "Specifically, not get healthier. What do you actually want to be able to do?" Gumbo thought about this. "Play pickleball competitively," he said. "Not just social play. I watched the courts yesterday. I want to be in the bracket." Something moved in Chad's expression, the satisfaction of a trainer recognizing a client type he understood. The competitive former athlete who had put the competition away for 20 years and wanted it back. That's achievable, he said. Realistically, depending on your current base fitness, 18 months to competitive bracket play. Some people seem to get there faster. Chad looked at him. Patricia, Gumbo said. She mentioned the knee. 14 months. Patricia had a different starting point in some ways, Chad said carefully. She came in with specific deficits that the program addressed efficiently. What tier is she in? A pause. The program has 3 tiers. The base tier covers foundational fitness, nutrition guidance, and standard recovery protocols. Most residents start there. He paused. The advanced tiers involve more intensive work, individualized programming, enhanced recovery support, supplementation guidance that goes beyond what you'd get from a general wellness program. What kind of supplementation? Chad leaned forward slightly, the movement of a man preparing to share something. The research on performance optimization for masters athletes, people over 50, over 60, has advanced significantly in the last decade. There are evidence-based protocols that most primary care physicians don't discuss because they're not trained in sports medicine, and that most wellness programs don't implement because they don't have the expertise. He looked at Gumbo. I have the expertise. What's in the protocols? It depends on the individual's assessment, blood work, baseline performance testing, body composition. We don't put anyone on an enhanced protocol without knowing where they're starting. He paused. The protocols can include amino acid compounds, peptide supplements, hormonal support. He said the last 2 words with the practiced ease of someone who had been saying them for a while and had worn the edges off. Hormonal support, meaning what specifically? Meaning compounds that support the body's natural hormonal environment as it relates to recovery and performance. The phrasing was a specific piece of construction, accurate enough to be defensible, indirect enough to require translation. Testosterone optimization in men over 50, for instance, is well documented clinically. The issue is that most men don't get the testing that would identify suboptimal levels. And human growth hormone. The room shifted. Chad's posture didn't change, nothing gross, nothing dramatic. But something behind his eyes adjusted, a recalibration happening fast enough that Gumbo almost missed it. Almost. HGH has a specific regulatory profile, Chad said. It requires a prescription from a licensed physician. We work within regulatory guidelines. He said it cleanly. What I offer isn't about legal gray areas. Of course not, Gumbo said. The enhanced tiers involve physician oversight. I have a collaborative relationship with a sports medicine physician who evaluates candidates for advanced protocols. He paused. It's a comprehensive approach. Testing, evaluation, protocol design, monitoring. Not a one-size solution. A physician. Gumbo wrote that in the back of his mind, because the composition book was in his guest unit, and he wasn't writing in front of Chad Barbieri. A sports medicine physician who evaluates candidates. A collaborator who existed at a remove that kept Chad technically on the right side of prescribing. What's the cost structure, he said. Base tier is included in the WA assessment, Chad said. Advanced tiers are fee-for-service. Tier 2 is $800 a month. Tier 3 is $1,800. $1,800 a month for what was being described as hormonal support and enhanced recovery in a 55-plus retirement community. He did the math without doing the math. 150 residents at Tier 2 was $120,000 a month. 50 residents at Tier 3 was $90,000 a month. Even with the physician cut and the cost of whatever was actually in the protocols, the margin was architectural. Who's the physician? Gumbo said. Chad looked at him. The assessment happening again. A prospective resident asking this question, at this stage of the intake conversation, was either a sophisticated consumer doing due diligence or something else. Dr. Marcus Webb, Chad said. He has a practice in Sarasota. Sports medicine and performance optimization. He paused. I can give you his contact if you want to speak with him directly before committing to anything. I'd appreciate that, Gumbo said. Chad wrote something on the tablet. Let me get you set up with a base assessment first. We'll do baseline blood work through the community health partner, run a movement screen, get a body composition reading. That gives us the data we need to have an intelligent conversation about which tier is right for you. He looked at Gumbo. The assessment is complimentary for prospective residents. That's generous. We want you to have all the information, Chad said. He smiled the clean, professional smile. The pickleball courts ran along the community's southern edge, 12 of them in 3 rows of 4, hard court surface with the standard dimensions and the color coding that distinguished the kitchen from the backcourt. At 8:15 on a Monday morning, every court was occupied. Gumbo stood at the fence and watched. The level varied significantly. 4 courts of social play at the near end. Mixed age, mixed ability, people who were there for the exercise and the company, and who laughed at their own errors and called out encouragement to each other across the net. The middle 4 courts were more serious, regular partners, recognizable patterns of play, the specific efficiency of people who had played together enough to anticipate. The 2 far courts were something else. The far courts had 6 people across them, and all 6 of them moved with the quality Gumbo had noticed in Don in the studio, the fluid efficiency of capability rather than effort, the ease of people who had more in the tank than the game was requiring. An older man at the far right court hit a shot that went low and fast to a precise spot in the opponent's kitchen, and then was already repositioning before the opponent got there, and the opponent got there and couldn't do anything with it. The older man was 75 if he was a day. A hand on the fence next to him. You watching or thinking about playing? The voice belonged to a man in his early 60s, lean, tanned, wearing the kind of training clothes that cost what they cost without advertising it. He had the upright posture of a man who was always aware of his posture, and the compressed energy of someone with opinions about most things, and the discipline to choose when to share them. Gumbo had done his research. Gerald Fitch, he said. A brief pause. That's right. You're the new prospective. Tiffany texts the neighborhood captains, Gumbo said. Tiffany texts the neighborhood captains, Gerald confirmed. He looked at the far courts. You play. I watched some videos. Gerald turned his head to look at him. Videos. 11 minutes worth. Gerald looked back at the courts. That's about 10 minutes more than most people bother with before they pick up a paddle for the first time. He paused. What do you actually know how to play? I understand the geometry, Gumbo said. Kitchen 2-bounce rule, non-volley zone. The scoring is strange. The scoring is completely rational once you accept that the only person who can win a point is the person serving. That's not how most games work. Most games weren't invented in 1965 by 3 dads on a badminton court in Washington State, Gerald said. The origin is absurd. The game itself is not. He looked at the far courts. Those people on court 11 are not playing a recreational sport. Gumbo looked. The older man had just finished a point that went across the net 9 times before it found a location that nobody could answer. How long have they been that good? Gumbo said. Gerald's jaw moved. Some of them recently, he said. Recently meaning? Meaning within the last year, Gerald said. Meaning in correspondence with certain developments in the community wellness program. He said the last 3 words, the way he'd probably said them to the people within earshot at the September championship, with the vocabulary of a retired pharmacist, which was the vocabulary of a man who understood what substances did to bodies and could see the results of substances in the bodies moving around him. "You didn't go to Chad's program," Gumbo said. Gerald looked at him sharply. "How would you know that?" "His Instagram. You're not in any of his posts. Most people in this community who play at that level are in at least a few." Gerald held the look for a moment. "You did your homework before you came." "Old habit." "I didn't go to the program," Gerald said. "I know enough about what enhanced performance looks like in a masters athlete to know what I was looking at when people started moving differently." He paused. "And I know enough about the regulatory environment around performance-enhancing substances to know that what I was looking at was not the natural result of a community wellness program, however good the program might be." "You raised it publicly." "I said what I observed, using accurate language." His jaw set. "I've been playing competitive pickleball for 6 years. I train seriously. I work with a coach. I know my own game, and I know when the game I'm playing against is different from the game those people used to play." He looked at the far courts. "Howard Caswell couldn't beat me 18 months ago. Howard Caswell beat me 6-2, 6-1 in October." He paused. "Howard Caswell is dead." They stood at the fence. "I talked to Vivian," Gerald said. "Not a question. I can't say who hired me." "You don't have to." He looked at Gumbo. "She talked to me last week. She wanted to know if I'd noticed anything. I told her what I told everyone else, what I observed using accurate language." He paused. "She's the kind of person who does something with information." "Yes," Gumbo said. "Are you going to do something with information?" "That's what I'm paid for," Gumbo said. Gerald looked at the courts. Court 11. The older man was doing it again. The low, fast shot to the precise kitchen location already repositioning, the opponent arriving too late. "His name is Raymond Coates," Gerald said. 77 years old. Retired civil engineer. 14 months ago, he used a walker for distances over 100 yards. He paused. "He has not used it recently." Gumbo looked at Raymond Coates, 77, moving on the pickleball court with the specific fluid efficiency of someone whose body had been given instructions it was following. "The program tier," he said. "What do you think is actually in the enhanced tiers?" Gerald looked at him with the dark eyes of a man who had been asking this question himself. "At minimum, human growth hormone. Probably EPO. The aerobic capacity improvements are too pronounced for HGH alone. Possibly testosterone optimization, which Chad will describe in clinical terms that make it sound like a vitamin." He paused. "The combination profile in older adults with any cardiac history," he stopped. "Howard had a valve thing." "Managed," Gumbo said. "Managed doesn't protect you from EPO," Gerald said. "EPO increases red blood cell mass and blood viscosity. In someone with a mitral valve defect, you're asking the heart to push thicker blood through a valve that isn't fully efficient." He looked at the courts. The ME ran a standard screen. "It wouldn't catch EPO." "No," Gerald said. "It wouldn't." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm a retired pharmacist, not a physician. I can tell you what the substances do. I can tell you what the contraindications are. I can tell you what the regulatory framework says about prescribing them." He paused. "What I can't do, what I have no standing to do, is compel anyone to look more carefully at Howard Caswell's death." "But I might," Gumbo said. Gerald looked at him. "You have a coach," Gumbo said. "The one you mentioned." "In Sarasota." I work with her twice a week. She work with anyone else from this community. She's coached 3 other residents here. 2 of them switched to Chad's program when it launched and stopped coming to her. He paused. One of them is on court 11 right now. Gumbo looked at Raymond Coates, 77, repositioning for the next point with the unhurried confidence of a man who no longer had to hurry because his body was faster than the situation required. I might need to talk to her, Gumbo said. I'll give you her number, Gerald said. Her name is Kim Nakamura. Tell her I sent you, and tell her what you're doing here. He paused. She had concerns before I did. She stopped talking about them when 2 clients left. Gumbo wrote the name in his composition book the moment he was back at the fence alone. The afternoon was for observation, and the community was generous with things to observe. He walked the grounds with the mild, appreciative ambulation of a prospective resident, taking the measure of what might become his home, which was its own performance, and one he found came naturally after years of doing similar things in procurement. The facility walkthrough, the vendor site visit, the careful touring of spaces while noting the things the tour wasn't pointing at. The Seaview Palms Wellness Center sat at the community's south end, adjacent to the lap pool complex. The main building was the studio and Chad's office and a recovery room with massage chairs and red light therapy panels that were either medically significant or decoratively expensive. Behind the main building, connected by a covered walkway, was the pool mechanical building, equipment, chemicals, pump systems, and attached to the pool mechanical building, accessible through a door that was padlocked and not on the tour route, was a storage structure that the architectural drawing in the sales office had labeled Wellness Center Storage. He'd seen the architectural drawing in the sales office because he'd asked Tiffany if he could see the site plan to understand the full scope of the amenity footprint, which was a thing a serious buyer would want to understand, and Tiffany had shown it to him because serious buyers were the purpose of the sales office. The wellness storage building was 12 by 20 feet. It was padlocked. It had a small window on the east side that had been painted over from the inside. It had a ventilation unit on the roof that was newer than the building, newer than the pool mechanical equipment, newer than the main wellness center structure. A ventilation unit newer than the building it served, on a storage building that was padlocked and had a painted-over window. He stood and looked at it for a moment from the covered walkway. Climate control. Something inside required climate control that the standard Florida heat management didn't provide. He walked on. Dinner at the Lanai produced 2 more data points, and a side of snapper that was competent without being interesting. The first data point was that the Lanai appeared to be the community's primary social hub in the evenings, and the social dynamics of 600 residents in a planned community revealed themselves in a restaurant the way social dynamics always revealed themselves in shared eating spaces. Who sat with whom, who acknowledged whom from across the room, who avoided whom with the studied casualness of people who had decided to avoid each other and had learned to do it in public. Chad Barbieri was at a corner table with a woman who was not his professional contact. She was 58, Gumbo guessed, blonde in the maintained way of women who had been blonde their whole lives and had negotiated the subsequent decades, wearing a dress that was appropriate for a restaurant dinner and slightly more than appropriate for a retirement community Monday evening. She was leaning forward across the table, and Chad was leaning back in the way of a man who understood that leaning back while someone leaned forward was its own kind of power. He found Arnie at the bar and sat next to him. "Who's at the corner table with Chad?" he said low. Arnie looked without appearing to look. "Sandra Beaumont," he said. "Unit 412. Widowed, 18 months ago. She's been in Chad's program since August. Advanced tier." Arnie was quiet for a moment. She and Chad have dinner approximately twice a week, he said. At the Lanai, or at the Café Amaikai on the trail. He paused. She's not the only one. No. Chad is, Arnie looked at his drink. Chad is attentive to certain members of the program in ways that extend past the professional relationship. He said this with the flat precision of a man delivering information he found distasteful but accurate. Patricia, the woman you met this morning. Don Whitfield. Sandra. He paused. There's a woman named Carol Resnick, who I believe is also in that category. How long has this been known? Known is the wrong word, Arnie said. Observed. Suspected. Discussed in terms that remain technically speculative. He looked at his drink again. In a community of 600 people, there is no such thing as a private life. There is only a life that hasn't been fully discussed yet. The second data point arrived at 7:45, when a man Gumbo didn't know sat down at the bar on Arnie's other side and said without preamble, "You the private investigator?" Arnie went still. Gumbo looked at the man. 60s, the build of someone who had been fit for a long time and maintained it, silver hair, the measured directness of a man who had decided to say a thing and was saying it. You have me confused with someone, Gumbo said. I don't think so, the man said. You drove up from Cedar Key in a Jeep with a Levy County registration. You spent 45 minutes at the fence watching the courts and talking to Gerald Fitch. You walked the full amenity perimeter this afternoon and spent 3 minutes looking at the pool building. He paused. My name is Don Whitfield. I was in the session this morning. Don. The man with the fluid efficiency, the plyometrics, the easy movement. Don is also in the program, Arnie said very quietly. The advanced tier, Don said. He said it without embarrassment and without performance. I've been in the advanced tier for 11 months. My PSA is monitored. My CBC is run every 8 weeks. I have a standing appointment with Dr. Webb every 6 weeks. He looked at Gumbo. I know exactly what I'm taking and why and what it's doing. I'm not 29 years old. I've made an informed decision about acceptable risk and acceptable benefit. Okay, Gumbo said. Howard's death was a tragedy, Don said. Howard had a cardiac condition that wasn't fully disclosed to Chad or to Dr. Webb when he enrolled in the advanced tier. I'm not saying that makes it acceptable. I'm saying it's a different situation than it would be if it were random. Did Chad know about the valve condition? Don paused. I don't know what Chad knew. I know what I disclosed. He looked at Gumbo. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand that not everyone in the program is a victim. Some of us are adults who made choices and are continuing to make them. He looked at the corner table where Chad was still leaning back while Sandra Beaumont leaned forward. Other things that are happening in this program are different. Those things you should look at. He stood. That's all I wanted to say. He left. Arnie watched him go. He looked at his drink. He looked at Gumbo. I didn't know Howard hadn't disclosed, he said. Did you disclose? Everything, Arnie said. I gave them my full medical history. Blood pressure, the knee, a minor arrhythmia I had in 2019 that resolved on its own. He paused. I told them everything. Gumbo looked at the corner table. Chad had reached across and put his hand briefly on Sandra Beaumont's forearm, a touch that lasted 2 seconds and communicated an entire geography of intention. He looked at the composition book, which was in his guest unit, and cataloged what he'd need to write in it when he got back. Don Whitfield's disclosure. The painted-over window on the storage building. Gerald Fitch's vocabulary. Arnie's arrhythmia. The ventilation unit newer than the building. Chad's hand on Sandra Bowman's forearm for exactly 2 seconds. And underneath all of it, the question he was beginning to form an answer to. Not whether Chad was running a pharmaceutical operation out of the wellness storage building, but how comprehensive that operation was, and how many people it had reached, and how many of those people had cardiac histories that hadn't been fully understood before someone handed them an EPO protocol. He paid his tab. He walked back to the guest unit. He wrote for an hour. When he was done, he had 4 pages and a list that started with the storage building and ended with Dr. Marcus Webb in Sarasota and had Chad Barbieri in the middle of it running in both directions. He closed the composition book. He thought about Howard Caswell winning the September championship 6-2, 6-1, and Vivian watching and not knowing what she was watching. He thought about what Arnie had said. She held up well. He looked at the ceiling of the guest unit, which was textured in the way of ceilings built in the 90s that had never had any particular opinion about themselves. Tomorrow, he needed to get into the storage building. He thought about how to get into the storage building for a while, and then he thought about Kim Nakamura, Gerald's coach in Sarasota, who had concerns before Gerald did and had stopped talking about them when 2 clients left. He picked up his phone. It was 9:45. Late for a cold call. He texted the number Gerald had given him. Kim, Gerald Fitch gave me your number. I'm a PI working a case that involves your former clients at Seaview Palms. Would you be willing to talk? Not urgent tonight, but soon. He put the phone on the nightstand. It buzzed 30 seconds later. I've been waiting for someone to ask. Tomorrow morning, 7 a.m., before my first client. There's a coffee place on Tamiami Trail called Morning Call. I'll be there. He looked at the text. He wrote back, I'll be there. He put the phone down. He looked at the ceiling again. Tomorrow at 7, he'd have Kim Nakamura. At 8, he had the baseline assessment with Chad, the blood work referral, the movement screen, the body composition reading, the entry point into the program where Chad would tell him what he needed to tell him to move him toward Tier 2. And sometime between 7 and whenever, he needed to look inside the wellness storage building. He thought about the padlock. The padlock was a master lock number 3, which he'd identified by its profile and shackle diameter from the walkway. He knew this because 28 years of procurement had included facility management contracts that had included lock hardware specifications, and he had retained this information the way he retained all information. Not by trying to, but by reading it once and having it stay. A number 3 could be shimmed with the right piece of aluminum. Or he could pick it, which he'd learned from a locksmith who had done work on the Severance Package's companionway hatch 3 years ago, and who had the didactic enthusiasm of a man who loved his craft and shared it freely. He'd practiced on his own boat for a week, and then not done it again, because it was the kind of skill that didn't present itself often enough to keep sharp on its own. He was either going to shim the padlock or pick it or find another way in, and he was going to do it in the window between the 6 a.m. opening of the Wellness Center and the 8 a.m. start of the courts, when the grounds crew was working and the early exercisers were inside, and the pool mechanical building sat in the specific quiet of infrastructure nobody thought about when it was working. He set the alarm for 5:15. He went to sleep. Outside on the screened lanai, the gopher tortoise had presumably returned to wherever gopher tortoises went at night, which was not something Gumbo knew, and which seemed like the kind of question that, once asked, could take you somewhere you hadn't planned to go. He did not ask it. He slept. Chapter 3. Morning Call was a strip mall coffee place on the Tamiami Trail that had decided its competitive advantage was being open at 5:30 and serving coffee that was better than it needed to be given the location. It had 6 tables, a counter with baked goods that rotated daily, and the specific ambient quality of a place where people came early for reasons. The contractor starting a job site, the nurse coming off nights, the coach whose first client was at 8 but who got there at 7 because that was when she thought. Kim Nakamura was at the corner table when Gumbo came in at 6:58. 42. Japanese-American. The compact, precise build of a former athlete who had stayed in motion after the competition stopped. Not the maintained fitness of effort, but the natural economy of a body that knew how to move and hadn't forgotten. She had a double espresso in front of her, and a legal pad with handwriting on it, and the expression of a woman who had been organizing something in her head since a text arrived the night before and had gotten it organized. She looked at him. The blue marlins, the composition book, the general magnitude of a 6'1" man in a Hawaiian shirt arriving at a strip mall coffee place before 7, and did a brief recalibration. "You're not what I pictured," she said. "What did you picture?" "Someone more, I don't know. Investigatory looking." "I find this works better," he said. He got a coffee from the counter and sat across from her. "Gerald says you had concerns before he did." "Gerald's concerns were pharmacological," she said. "Mine were mechanical." She looked at the legal pad. "I'm a coach. I watch people move. I've been coaching masters athletes for 14 years. People in their 50s, 60s, 70s who are serious about performance. I know what serious training produces in terms of movement quality, and I know the timeline it produces it on, and I know what falls outside that timeline." "What fell outside it?" "2 of my clients at Seaview Palms," she said. "I've been coaching at the community once a week for 3 years. Court time, movement drills, tactical work, the kind of coaching that takes players who are already competent and makes them better." She wrapped her hands around the espresso. "Don Whitfield came to me 2 years ago. Decent player, good athletic background, motivated. We worked together for 8 months. The improvement was consistent with what 8 months of serious coaching produces: meaningful, visible, linear." She paused. "Then he joined Chad's program. And the improvement changed." "The improvement went non-linear," she said. Which, in a 68-year-old man who had been making linear progress, should not happen. Non-linear improvement in masters athletes, the kind where you cross a threshold and suddenly the body is doing things the work alone doesn't account for, that's a specific signal. She looked at him. "The first time I saw it, I thought I was wrong. I recalibrated. I looked at his training load. I looked at his sleep and his nutrition. I looked for any variable that could explain it." She paused. "Then I saw the same thing in Raymond Coates." 77, Gumbo said. "Civil engineer. Raymond came to me 18 months ago. Arthritic hip, reduced range of motion, limited lateral movement, the profile of an older athlete doing well to stay on the court. We worked together for 4 months. Progress was appropriate for his starting point and his age." She stopped. "He went into Chad's program. 3 months later, I watched him move laterally in a way that his hip anatomy should not have permitted. Not permitted literally. I've been doing this for 14 years. I've worked with hundreds of athletes his age. What Raymond's hip was doing at month 3 of the wellness program was not consistent with his baseline anatomy, his training history, or any natural progression of physical improvement." She looked at her espresso. It was consistent with significant anabolic intervention. Muscle mass change, connective tissue response, inflammation reduction beyond what coaching and standard supplementation produces. She paused. "I stopped coaching him 6 months ago." "Because you thought he was doping?" "Because I wasn't comfortable being professionally associated with whatever was producing the results I was seeing." She looked up. "I don't accuse. I remove myself from the situation. I did the same when Dawn's improvement went non-linear. She paused. And then I waited. Because in my experience, when something like this is happening, the waiting part ends when something goes wrong. Howard Caswell, Gumbo said. Howard Caswell, she said. She looked at the legal pad. I didn't coach Howard. He came to me once, about 2 years ago, for a single assessment session. I gave him a full movement screen and a developmental recommendation and a quote for ongoing work, and he thanked me and never called back. She paused. 2 months later, he joined Chad's program. Did you know about his cardiac history? He mentioned the valve condition during the assessment. It was disclosed as something managed and monitored, not as a contraindication to training. She looked at him. It's not a contraindication to training. It is a contraindication to certain pharmacological protocols. Specifically, EPO. She looked at him. You've done your research. I started Saturday. EPO in a patient with mitral valve insufficiency, she said. Even mild, even managed, even monitored, you're increasing blood viscosity in a heart that's already working around an inefficiency. The risk profile is real. It's documented. Any sports medicine physician who was prescribing EPO to Howard Caswell should have had that conversation explicitly and documented the patient's informed consent explicitly. She paused. Whether that conversation happened, I don't know. There's a physician, Gumbo said. Marcus Webb. Sarasota. Sports medicine and performance optimization. Her expression changed. Not surprise, the expression of someone having a suspicion confirmed. You know him, Gumbo said. I know of him, she said carefully. He has a practice in Sarasota that markets to masters athletes and active retirees. He has a good reputation in some circles for being willing to prescribe protocols that more conservative physicians won't consider. She paused. He also has a relationship with at least 2 other retirement community wellness programs on the coast that I'm aware of. He's Chad's physician on multiple properties. That would be my inference, she said. I don't have documentation. What I have is that 3 different coaches I know who work in similar communities have mentioned a sports medicine physician in Sarasota named Webb in the context of clients whose improvement outpaced their training. 3 communities. Chad Barbieri at Seaview Palms was one. He wrote in the composition book, Webb, Multiple Properties, Marcus Webb Sarasota, Sports Medicine, Relationship with Other Retirement Community Wellness Programs. He looked at it. I need to look at Webb's practice before I look at Chad. Yes, she said. Chad is the delivery mechanism. Webb is the prescriber. She paused. Without Webb, Chad can't write the script. Without Chad, Webb doesn't have the client pipeline. She looked at the legal pad. There's one more thing I can tell you. Tell me. The 2 clients I stopped coaching, Don and Raymond. Before I stepped back from both of them, I had conversations about their experience in the program. Not interrogations, just normal professional discussion, checking in, understanding what they were doing so I could program around it. She paused. Both of them mentioned a component of the program that they described as a bracket system. A bracket system. A tiered access structure within the advanced tier. They described it as a kind of performance tournament. As your numbers improved, you got access to additional protocols. As your on-court results improved, you moved up in the bracket. She looked at him. Don described it as motivating. Raymond thought it was a game. She paused. What it sounded like to me was a distribution mechanism. Move people up tiers, sell them more intensive protocols at each level. Use competitive results as the metric that unlocks the next purchase. Gumbo wrote, bracket system within advanced tier. Performance unlocks protocols. Distribution mechanism, dressed as competition structure. He looked at what he'd written. He thought about the whiteboard in Chad's office. Motivational language. Program metrics. He'd seen the whiteboard from the doorway and registered it as background. He hadn't read what was on it. The whiteboard in his office, he said. Kim looked at him. I've never been in his office. I was. Briefly. He looked at the composition book. I didn't read what was on it. The pool shed at 6:15 in the morning had the quality of all infrastructure spaces before the day required them. Functional, quiet, serving its purpose without an audience. The grounds crew was working the east greens, 3 people with a golf cart and leaf blowers operating 400 yards away. The lap pool had 2 early swimmers in it, focused, moving in lanes, not looking at anything that wasn't the water directly in front of them. He came around the pool mechanical building from the west side, along the fence line, in the shadow of the maintenance landscaping that someone had planted with intention between the pool complex and the residential units behind it. The kind of landscaping that said privacy without saying it. The padlock was where he'd noted it. Master number 3. He'd brought a tension wrench and a short hook pick from the severance package's toolbox wrapped in a cloth in his shorts pocket, because he'd known since Monday afternoon that this moment was coming, and he was a man who prepared for moments. He'd practiced on the companionway hatch at 5:30 that morning in the guest unit's parking space, with the locksmith's instructions in the part of his memory where useful things went. He'd gotten it in 40 seconds. That was slower than it should be, but faster than it needed to be for this. The tension wrench first. Light pressure on the core. The pick finding the pins, 5 of them in a number 3 standard. He worked them in order, light touch, the feedback coming through the wrench the way the locksmith had described it, a small give when a pin seated, the cylinder wanting to turn if he let it. He didn't let it yet. 4 pins in 40 seconds, the 5th being difficult, a spool pin. He could feel the shape of it in the way it moved differently from the others. He adjusted the tension. The pin seated. The cylinder turned. He was inside in 57 seconds. The storage building was 12 by 20 feet of climate-controlled pharmaceutical inventory, and the climate control explained itself immediately. The ventilation unit he'd seen on the roof was running a pharmaceutical-grade refrigeration system that kept the interior at 55 degrees and low humidity, and the interior held on stainless steel wire shelving along the 2 long walls what was probably $40,000 of controlled and controlled-adjacent substances organized with the efficient precision of someone who had decided that if they were going to do this, they were going to do it properly. He did not touch anything. He looked. Left wall, refrigerated section, vials and labeled trays. The labels were typed, not handwritten, in a font that was not a pharmacy label font, but was organized the same way: compound name, concentration, lot number, expiration date. He read the labels from left to right without moving the vials. Somatropin. HG8. The pharmaceutical grade. 16 trays of it. Epoetin alpha. EPO. 8 trays, 4 vials per tray. Testosterone sapionate. 4 trays. IGF-1 LR3. Something he'd read about in the Saturday research. Insulin-like growth factor, long-acting analog. The peptide that showed up in Arnie Lipscomb's blood panel. 6 trays. Right wall, non-refrigerated, sealed boxes stacked in order. Injectable L-carnitine. BPC 157, a peptide compound. TB 500. MK 677. The peptide category. The things that sat in the regulatory gray zone between supplements and pharmaceuticals, things that were sold as research chemicals and used in human performance programs because the FDA hadn't gotten to them yet. And at the end of the right wall, On a standalone shelf, a 3-ring binder. He picked it up. He opened it. The binder was a distribution log. Every page was a client record. Name, Seaview Palms, unit number, program tier, protocol assignment, lot numbers dispensed, dates. The pages were organized alphabetically. He found Howard Caswell on page 4. Howard Caswell, Unit 218. Advanced Tier 3. Protocol designation, A3 CARDIAC restricted. The designation had a handwritten asterisk next to it and a note at the bottom of the page in the same hand. Dr. W. Confirmed mitral valve, mild, managed. EPO protocol modified. Reduced dose per Dr. W guidance. Patient counseled on risk factors. Signed consent 3/14. He read it twice. Modified EPO protocol. Not no EPO. Reduced dose EPO. A consent form signed on March 14th. He looked at the date on the page header. Howard Caswell had been in the advanced tier since February. The cardiac restriction notation had been added in March, meaning someone had learned about the valve condition after enrollment, not before. He photographed the page with his phone. He found Arnold Lipscomb on page 9. Arnie was advanced tier 2. Protocol A2, STANDARD. The lot numbers matched the IGF-1 LR3 and somatropin on the left wall shelf. He photographed that page. He found Patricia Reinhold, Unit 447 in Tier 3. Don Whitfield in Tier 3. Raymond Coates in Tier 3. He photographed each page. At the back of the binder, behind a tabbed divider labeled bracket, was the whiteboard's paper origin, a printed version of the tournament bracket structure Kim Nakamura had described. 12 names in a bracket layout. Next to each name, a protocol code. Between each bracket round, a line that read Advance on Performance Metrics with a list of metrics below it. On-court win percentage, movement screen improvements, body composition changes, blood work targets. The bracket had 2 names in the final column. One was Raymond Coates. The other was Howard Caswell. Howard's name had a line through it. The line had been drawn with a red pen, and it was the only thing in the binder written in red. He photographed the bracket page. He put the binder back, exactly as he'd found it. He left the storage building and pulled the door shut behind him and reset the padlock, listening for the shackle to seat, and walked back along the fence line the way he'd come. The lap swimmers were still in their lanes. The grounds crew was still on the east greens. Nobody had watched him do any of this. He walked to the Perks Cafe and got a coffee and sat at an outside table and opened the composition book. He wrote for 10 minutes without stopping. Chad Barbieri was at the Wellness Center at 5:30 as Arnie had said, and ran the baseline assessment with the same professional competence he brought to everything visible. Blood draw referral, a form for the Community Health Partners Lab, which operated out of a clinic 2 miles south on the trail. Movement screen, a series of functional positions Gumbo moved through with the body he had, which was the body of a man who had been more athletic than he currently was, and whose body remembered this at the movement level, even if other things had changed. Body composition, a bioimpedance scale that gave him a reading he didn't look at directly. Good bone density, Chad said, reading the scale output. Better than the average for your demographic. I walked a lot in my 20s, Gumbo said. Foundation is there, Chad said. He said it the same way he'd said it yesterday. The diagnosis, not flattery delivery. Base tier will address the current composition and the knee complaint. Depending on your commitment level and blood work results, we can discuss where to go from there. He paused. The lab will have results in 48 hours. I'll have a program recommendation ready when they do. The tiers, Gumbo said. The advanced work. You mentioned a physician involvement. Dr. Webb reviews all advanced tier candidates personally, Chad said. He's very thorough. If the advanced program is right for you, he'll want to meet you. When does that happen? Typically, at the point where we've seen the blood work, and I've made the initial recommendation. Chad looked at the assessment form. Some people come in, and the base tier is exactly right for them. Others, their profile, their goals, their readiness, they're clearly advanced tier candidates from the start. He looked at Gumbo. You have competitive instincts. You mentioned the bracket. People with those instincts tend to do well in the advanced program. What does the advanced program deliver that the base doesn't? Chad leaned forward. The trust-building posture, the spotlight warmth. I'm going to be direct with you, he said, which was what people said when they were about to be selectively direct. The human body, particularly the male body over 50, has hormonal and physiological parameters that significantly limit what coaching and training alone can accomplish. The limiting factors aren't effort or commitment. They're biological. He paused. The advanced program addresses those biological limiting factors directly. Under physician supervision, with monitoring, with a protocol that's individualized to your specific numbers. He looked at Gumbo. The results you've seen on the courts and in the studio, those are the results. Howard Caswell's results, Gumbo said. The room didn't change. Chad didn't change. Something behind the spotlight moved. Howard was in the advanced program, Chad said. His death was a tragedy. It was also a cardiac event in a man with a documented cardiac condition. He paused. The program didn't cause that. The modified EPO protocol didn't contribute to it. The room changed. Chad looked at him for 3 seconds. The spotlight was off. What was behind it was not hostile. It was assessing, fast and serious, the look of a man running calculations that had just changed their inputs. I think you should tell me who you are, Chad said. I've been telling you who I am, Gumbo said. I'm Gumbo Malone. Retired from corporate logistics in Columbus. I'm also a licensed private investigator in the state of Florida, and I've been hired by a family member of Howard Caswell to understand the circumstances of his death. He kept his voice level. The same voice he'd used across procurement tables when a vendor had just realized the negotiation wasn't going the direction they'd expected. I've seen the binder in the storage building. Chad was very still. The distribution log, Gumbo said. The bracket. The protocol designation for Howard, A3-CARDIAC restricted. The note about the modified EPO dose and the consent form from March 14th. He looked at Chad. The consent form that was signed a month after Howard enrolled, because the valve condition wasn't disclosed at enrollment. That's not, Chad stopped. Restarted. The consent process was. The consent process was documented, Gumbo said. I'm not disputing the documentation. What the documentation shows is that your physician was aware of a cardiac contraindication to EPO and chose to continue the protocol at reduced dosage rather than discontinue it. He paused. That's a conversation for Dr. Webb and his malpractice carrier, not for you and me. He let that land. What's a conversation for you and me is the bracket system, the distribution mechanism, the $40,000 of pharmaceutical inventory in a padlocked storage building that I'd estimate generates somewhere between $100,000 and $200,000 a month in program fees from residents who trust that the community wellness director is operating within appropriate regulatory bounds. The silence in Chad Barbieri's glass-walled office had the specific quality of silence after something had been said that both parties understood could not be unsaid. Chad looked at his desk, at his hands on the desk, at the whiteboard behind him that had the tournament bracket printed in a font that matched the paper version in the binder. What do you want? He said. It was the first thing he'd said that didn't have performance in it. Just the flat question of a man who had found the edge of the situation and was looking over it. "Right now, I want you to call Dr. Webb," Gumbo said. "I want you to tell him that a private investigator hired by the Caswell family has documentation of the program's pharmaceutical inventory and distribution records and is going to be speaking to a Florida Department of Health investigator and the FDA's Office of Criminal Investigations within the next 48 hours. He paused. "I want him to have time to call his attorney before that happens, because the part that lands on Webb is considerably larger than the part that lands on you, and I'd rather he be represented when the phone calls start." "And me?" Chad said. "What lands on me?" Gumbo looked at him. At the 29-year-old face, the body made into a professional credential, the glass-walled office with its framed certifications and its motivational language and its whiteboard bracket that was also a drug distribution schedule. "You built something that genuinely works at the base level," Gumbo said. "The foundational program is competent and it's helping people." "That's true." He paused. "You also built a mechanism for delivering controlled substances to elderly patients outside a regulated pharmaceutical framework in ways that contributed to a man's death." He paused again. "Those are two things you did, and both of them are true." Chad looked at the whiteboard. "Howard disclosed the valve thing," he said. "In March. Not at enrollment." He said it quietly, not as a defense exactly, more as a fact he needed to put somewhere. "I called Webb the same day. Webb said reduced dose was manageable." He stopped. "I should have stopped the protocol entirely." "Yes," Gumbo said. "You should have." Webb said. "I know what Webb said." Webb's going to have to explain what Webb said to people whose job it is to evaluate those explanations. He looked at Chad. "Make the call." Chad picked up his phone. He looked at it. He put it down. "I have 4 clients who are at real clinical risk right now," he said. "People in Tier 3 who have been on these protocols for 8, 10, 12 months. If this stops abruptly," he stopped. "Some of these protocols can't just be stopped. The tapering has to be managed." Gumbo looked at him. "That's a real concern," he said. "Make it part of the conversation with Webb. Webb is a physician. The management of current patients is his responsibility, and it starts now." He paused. "If he's reluctant to take responsibility for that, his attorney can help him understand why he should." Chad picked up the phone again. He called Webb. Gumbo listened to one side of the conversation, which was enough. Webb picked up. Chad said the words Gumbo had told him to say, more or less, in the specific order a man said things when he was scared, and following instructions and trying to find the right register for both simultaneously. Webb was quiet for a long time on the other end. Then he said something Gumbo couldn't hear. Then Chad said yes. Then he hung up. "He's calling his attorney," Chad said. "Good," Gumbo said. He stood. "One more thing. Sandra Beaumont. Patricia Reinhold. Carol Resnick." He looked at Chad. The personal dimensions of those relationships, and immediately. Chad looked at him with the expression of someone who had been managing multiple situations simultaneously and had just been reminded that the investigator had a wider aperture than he'd accounted for. "That's not," he started. "I know it's not the same category," Gumbo said. "I'm not here about that. But when this comes to light, and it's going to come to light, the combination of the pharmaceutical operation and the personal entanglements is going to produce a specific narrative. The narrative is going to be worse for you than either thing alone." He paused. "End it cleanly, in writing, with appropriate professional language. Today." Chad looked at his hands. "Today," Gumbo said again. He walked out of the glass-walled office and through the studio and out the wellness center's main door into the Osprey morning, which was doing what Osprey mornings did in November. Blue and warm and clear, the kind of morning that made no promises about the afternoon, but delivered entirely on the morning. He called Francine from the path between the wellness center and the pool complex. "I need the name of a Florida Department of Health investigator who handles pharmaceutical compliance," he said when she answered. "And I need the FDA Office of Criminal Investigations field contact for the Tampa district." A pause. "You found the shed." "I found the shed." "How bad?" $40,000 of pharmaceutical inventory. Somatropin, EPO, testosterone cypionate, IGF-1 analogs. A distribution log with 41 client records. A tournament bracket that doubles as the delivery mechanism. He paused. And a notation on Howard Caswell's record that shows his physician knew about the cardiac contraindication and continued the EPO protocol at reduced dose. Francine was quiet for a moment. The physician. Marcus Webb, Sarasota. Sports medicine. He's calling his attorney as of about 4 minutes ago. He should be, she said. I'll have the DOE contact and the FDA field number to you within the hour. Another pause. Gumbo. Yeah. 41 clients. Some of them have been on these protocols for a year. I know. Webb is a physician, and he's now legally on the hook for the management of current patients, whether he likes it or not. He paused. Call Vivian Caswell. She needs to know where this is before it comes out sideways in the media. I'll call her now. A pause. The consent form for Howard. March 14th. Yes. He knew, Francine said. Not a question. He knew the risk was modified, not eliminated, Gumbo said. He signed the form. He kept going. He looked at the pool complex, the lap swimmers finishing their morning sets, the water flat and clean in the November light. Vivian's going to have to sit with that. Yes, Francine said. She is. He hung up. He stood on the path for a moment. He thought about the September championship. Howard Caswell winning 6-2, 6-1 against Gerald Fitch, who trained in Arizona. Howard knowing what he'd taken to get there and deciding the winning was worth it. He thought about Vivian watching and thinking she was watching her husband do something wonderful. He thought about what it meant to love someone and be wrong about what they were doing, and then have the thing they were doing be part of what killed them. He opened the composition book to a fresh page. He wrote the date, the address, the case status. At the bottom of the page he wrote, Howard Caswell made his own choice. He signed the form. He kept going. He looked at it. Vivian's going to have to live inside that. He closed the book. He walked back toward the guest unit to call the DOE and the FDA and the number Francine was going to send him. The gopher tortoise was back on the retention pond bank. It had not moved appreciably from where he'd last seen it, which for a gopher tortoise was a perfectly reasonable approach to the interval between yesterday evening and this morning, and which Gumbo found in the specific way of this particular moment unexpectedly comforting. He sat on the lanai for a moment before he made the calls. He looked at the tortoise. The tortoise looked at whatever gopher tortoises looked at when they looked at things, which was not, Gumbo suspected, the complicated moral arithmetic of consent forms and managed risk and the things people chose to do with their bodies in the service of winning something they'd been told they couldn't win anymore. The tortoise just sat there. Gumbo appreciated this. Then he picked up the phone and started making the calls that would unwind what Chad Barbieri had built in a padlocked storage building behind a pool shed in a retirement community in Osprey, Florida, where 600 people were living their post-career lives in the sunshine and making choices about what they were willing to do to feel the way they used to feel. 41 of them had made a specific choice. One of them was dead. The rest had a conversation coming that nobody was going to enjoy. Chapter 4. The Florida Department of Health investigator's name was Robles. Diane Robles. She picked up on the second ring, which meant she was either the kind of person who picked up on the second ring or the name Francine Dowd had invoked when she texted the contact had cleared the way. Probably both. "I've been waiting for a call about Marcus Webb," she said. Gumbo was on the lanai. The tortoise had not moved. "Tell me what you know," he said. "I know that Webb's practice generates a statistically improbable volume of HGH prescriptions for a single physician sports medicine operation in Sarasota County," she said. "I know his billing to Medicare for associated blood work runs about 40% above the regional average for his specialty. And I know his name has come up in 2 separate complaints from licensed pharmacies in the last 18 months, pharmacies that declined to fill prescriptions they considered outside clinical norms." She paused. "What I don't have is documentation of the downstream distribution." "Which is what you're telling me you have." "Distribution logs. 41 clients at one property. Pharmaceutical inventory on site. Protocol records with physician authorization noted for each client." He paused. "One deceased client with a cardiac contraindication that the physician knew about and worked around." She was quiet for a moment. "The deceased client. Howard Caswell." "Yes. Mitral valve condition. Enrolled in an EPO protocol at reduced dose per physician guidance. Signed a consent form in March. Died in October on a pickleball court of a cardiac event." The MES report. Natural cause. Standard talk screen. Nothing that would flag EPO specifically. "Do you know if biological samples were retained?" "I know the question needs to be asked, and I know I'm not the one to ask it." He looked at the composition book. The client record for Caswell shows a protocol designation, A3-CARDIAC restricted, and a handwritten notation that Webb confirmed the modified dose arrangement. That notation is in the distribution binder. He paused. "The binder is currently in the storage building where I found it. I photographed the relevant pages." "Who else has physical access to that building?" "Chad Barbieri, the wellness director. Possibly Webb. I don't know his access level. The building is padlocked." He paused. "The padlock was resecured when I left." Robles was quiet. He could hear her writing. "I need you to understand that anything you removed from that building—" "I removed nothing," he said. "I photographed. The binder is where it was." "Good. More writing. I'm going to need your photographs. And I'm going to need a formal written statement of what you observed and how you observed it." A pause. "The how is going to matter. How did you access the building?" He'd thought about this since he'd walked back from the pool shed. The honest answer was a tension wrench and a hook pick and 57 seconds. The legal answer depended on whether he'd been trespassing, which depended on whether his prospective resident status included the expectation of access to all community facilities, which was a question a good attorney could keep interesting for some time. "The building was unlocked," he said. Robles was quiet for a moment. "The building was unlocked. That's what I found when I tried the door," he said. Another moment. "I'll need the statement by end of business today. And the photographs." She paused. "Mr. Malone, this conversation did not precede any action by my office. My office will conduct an independent inspection of the property and its facilities under our standard authority. Whatever I find independently. Understood, he said. One more thing. The physician. Has Webb been notified? By Barbieri. This morning. He's calling his attorney. Of course he is. She didn't say it with contempt. Just the flat recognition of a sequence she'd seen before. Send me the statement and the photographs. My direct email is in the contact Francine sent you. She paused. And Mr. Malone? Whatever you tell your client, tell her to be patient. These things take longer than they should. She hung up. He called the FDA field number next. The Tampa district office answered with a recorded message that gave him 4 options. He chose the option for reporting suspected adulteration or misbranding of human drugs and was on hold for 11 minutes before a man named Garrett came on the line and took the information with the careful, methodical quality of someone filling in a form designed by a committee that had considered every possible contingency and added a field for it. He sent the photographs to Robles at 9:40. He wrote the statement on the laptop in the guest unit and sent it at 10:15. He wrote a case summary for the composition book while he was at it, because the composition book was where he thought and the thinking wasn't done. At 10:30, Francine called back. Vivian's been told, she said. I spoke to her for 40 minutes. How is she? A pause that held several things. She's processing. Francine chose the word carefully. The consent form was the hard part. She knew Howard had chosen the program. She didn't know he'd been told there was a specific risk and had chosen to continue. How did she respond to that? She was quiet for a long time. And then she said, and I'm giving you her words because they're better than mine. She said, Howard spent 39 years making decisions about acceptable risk in an operating room. I should have known he'd apply the same logic to himself. Francine paused. She said it without anger, which was harder to hear than anger would have been. Gumbo looked at the composition book, at what he'd written the night before. She's going to have to live inside that. The civil question, he said. Webb's liability. I've sent her a referral to a medical malpractice attorney in Tampa. The consent form complicates the case but doesn't eliminate it. If the dosing guidance was negligent, if the monitoring was inadequate, if Webb failed to ensure Howard fully understood the risk rather than just sign a form, there are arguments. She paused. But it's a hard case, Gumbo. Howard was a thoracic surgeon. The argument that he didn't understand what he was consenting to is going to be difficult. He was also a 68-year-old retired man who wanted to win at pickleball, Gumbo said. That's a different cognitive context than an operating room. Yes, Francine said. It is. The attorney will make that argument. She paused. There's something else. Tell me. I ran the Seaview Palms WA financials. They're publicly filed with the state. Homeowners associations over 100 units have to file annual financial disclosures. She paused. The HOA's general fund has been running a consistent variance for the past 22 months. Expenditures that exceed the authorized budget in the category of wellness and fitness operations. He wrote WA Financials Variance Wellness Operations category, 22 months. How much variance? Cumulative over 22 months, $412,000 in excess expenditures above the board-approved budget. She paused. The wellness program's operating budget was approved at $90,000 annually. The actual expenditures have been running at $230,000. She paused again. The difference is approximately $140,000 a year going out of the WA General Fund into the Wellness Operations category without board authorization. Gumbo looked at what he'd written. Where is it going? That's the question. The HOA's accounting firm is the same firm that's been processing the books for 7 years. If the variance has been in the filings for 22 months and nobody has flagged it, either the accounting firm has been complicit or someone has been managing the presentation of the documents very carefully. She paused. I called the WA board chair this morning. Her name is Marlene Kovac. I told her I was a financial consultant conducting a routine compliance review. I didn't mention your name or the case. And I asked about the wellness program budget. What did she say? She said the wellness program had been a significant community investment, and the board had approved supplemental allocations as needed. She paused. I asked her how many supplemental allocations had been approved in the last 2 years. She said she'd have to check the minutes. A pause. I told her I had the minutes, and the approved supplemental allocations totaled $41,000. She went quiet. The board thinks they approved $41,000 in supplements, Gumbo said. The books show $140,000 in excess spending annually. The board thinks they've been approving supplements to a legitimate community wellness program, Francine said. What they've actually been funding, to the tune of $100,000 a year above what they authorized, is the pharmaceutical inventory and the program overhead for a performance-enhancing drug operation. Gumbo wrote, WA General Fund, $140,000 per year excess. Board thinks $41,000 approved, actual going to pharma inventory plus program overhead. He looked at it. Chad is skimming the WA to fund the inventory. Chad is billing the WA for wellness program operating expenses that include pharmaceutical purchasing that the board has never specifically authorized and doesn't know about. She paused. Whether that constitutes embezzlement in the strict legal sense depends on whether the expense categorization was fraudulent, which it was, and whether there was intent to deceive the board, which, given 22 months of undetected overruns, seems evident. He's been running the drug operation on the HOA's money, Gumbo said, while charging residents $1,800 a month for Tier 3 access. She paused. He's been paid twice. Once by the residents in program fees, and once by the community in operating expenses. He sat with this for a moment. The $40,000 of pharmaceutical inventory in the storage building. The $200,000 a month in program fees he'd estimated. The $140,000 a year from the WA General Fund. The architecture of it was more complete than he'd understood from inside the pool shed. Chad Barbieri had not built a drug operation that made money from selling drugs. He'd built a drug operation that also charged the community for the drugs it was selling, so that the residents who weren't in the advanced tiers were subsidizing the pharmaceutical program that the advanced tier residents were paying for directly. Marlene Kovac, he said. The board chair. She needs to know today. I'm calling her back at noon, Francine said. With your name this time, and a clearer picture of what she's looking at. She paused. The Doe investigation is going to overlap with a state financial crimes referral if the embezzlement piece is what it appears to be. Let Marlene's attorney sort the overlap, he said. That's their problem. Yes. A pause. Gumbo. How many residents do you think know the full picture of the pharmaceutical operation? 41 who were in the program and knew what they were taking, more or less. The full financial picture, none of them. None of them knew they were paying for drugs through their WA fees. The residents in the base tier are paying for drugs they're not getting, he said. The residents in the advanced tiers are paying twice, program fees and their portion of the WA General Fund, for drugs that should be coming from a regulated pharmacy with a proper prescription pathway. Francine was quiet for a moment. $140,000 a year in WA funds is, at 600 units, that's over $200 per household annually that's been going to this. Yes. The residents who didn't participate in the program are going to be unhappy about that. Extremely unhappy, he said, which is going to complicate the narrative for the 41 who did participate, because some of them are going to have opinions about privacy and medical autonomy and their right to make their own choices. Don Whitfield, Francine said. Don Whitfield, he confirmed. And Raymond Coates, and Patricia Reinhold, and a number of other adults who made informed choices about what they were putting in their bodies, and who are going to find those choices somewhat public in about 48 hours. How public? He thought about the AP wire, about the story that a Fort Myers TV station's weatherman had known what he knew because of a woman on a shrimp boat, about how quickly a retirement community drug ring story could go national. Very, he said. He found Gerald Fitch at the courts at 11. Gerald was running drills with a ball machine, working the backhand cross-court in the specific, repetitive way of a man who had identified a weakness and was addressing it without romance about the process. He stopped the machine when he saw Gumbo coming. "It's happening," Gerald said. "Not a question." "The dough is moving," Gumbo said. "The FDA has a report. The financial piece is being referred." He paused. "It's happening." Gerald looked at the courts. At Court 11, where Raymond Coates was in the middle of a point, his 77-year-old body still doing what it had been doing for 10 months, the fluid efficiency that shouldn't have been there still there, the capabilities the program had given him still expressing themselves on the hard court surface. "Raymond," Gerald said. "Raymond and 40 others are going to need their physicians involved immediately," Gumbo said. "The protocols have to be tapered properly. Webb is presumably addressing that with his attorney. It's in his interest to manage the existing patients before a regulatory action makes him do it under worse circumstances." "Does Raymond know?" Gerald said. "Not yet." Gerald watched the point complete. Raymond moving to the net, placing a shot that ended the point cleanly, the opponent conceding with a wave of the paddle. "Raymond was using a walker 14 months ago," Gerald said. "I know. Whatever he took, it worked. His hip is functional in ways it wasn't. His quality of life is genuinely better." He looked at Gumbo. "I'm not saying what Chad did was right. I know it wasn't right. I know the Howard piece is. I know what that is." He paused. "I'm saying that 40 people at Seaview Palms are going to be told in the next few days that the thing that made them feel like themselves again is going away. And some of them are not going to understand why the law applies to them the way it does." "The law doesn't particularly care whether it's understood," Gumbo said. "But the people managing the tapering, Webb, whatever physicians end up involved, they can work with individuals on what legitimate alternatives look like. There are legal pathways for some of this through proper clinical channels." "At 180 times the cost," Gerald said. "Probably," Gumbo said. He didn't soften it. Gerald looked at the ball machine. At the drill he'd stopped. He bent down and picked up a ball from the court and turned it in his hand. "Howard beat me fair," he said quietly. "Whatever he took, he still had to play the game. He still had to put the ball where it needed to go." He paused. "I've been angry about the September final for 2 months. I'm trying to figure out where to put that anger now that he's dead." "That's a different question than the one I was hired to answer," Gumbo said. Not unkindly. "I know." He set the ball in the machine basket. "Thank you for doing what you came here to do." He looked at Gumbo. "Vivian hired the right person." "She's the kind of person who does things right," Gumbo said. Yes, Gerald said. She is. He turned the machine back on. I'm going to finish my drills. Gumbo left him to his backhand cross-court and walked back toward the guest unit. He found Arnie on his lanai at noon, which was where Arnie appeared to spend his midday hours when he wasn't on the courts, sitting with a glass of water and the slightly suspended quality of a man who had been thinking hard about something and had temporarily run out of new angles. He sat down next to him. You found what you were looking for, Arnie said. Yes. The storage building. Yes. Arnie looked at the middle distance. 41 people, he said. He'd heard the number from somewhere. The community information moved the way all community information moved. I'm one of 41. Yes. And Howard. Howard was one of them. He was in a more intensive tier than you. He paused. He also had a cardiac condition that should have been a hard stop on certain protocols. It wasn't. He let Arnie sit with that. The consent form he signed, he knew there was a risk. He chose to continue. Arnie looked at his water glass. Howard would have, he said. He was a thoracic surgeon. He understood risk-benefit math better than most people. He paused. That doesn't mean the risk was properly communicated. That doesn't mean the monitoring was adequate. No, Gumbo said. It doesn't. What happens to us? Arnie said it as a statement that needed to become a question. The 41. Your physicians are going to need to be involved. The protocols need to be tapered properly. That's a medical decision, not a legal one. The regulatory process will take time. He paused. Your individual medical situation is between you and your doctors. The legal and regulatory piece doesn't change that. The specialist appointment, Arnie said. Thursday. Tell him everything. The program, what you were taking, the duration, the dosing as best you understand it. He paused. Tell him before he has to ask. Arnie nodded. He looked at the retention pond. The gopher tortoise was not visible from his lanai, which was 4 units down, but there were other tortoises in the community, and one of them had apparently found Arnie's retention pond bank worth its attention. A different tortoise, doing what tortoises did. I felt good, Arnie said. For the first time in 4 years, I felt like myself. He paused. My wife Elaine died 3 years ago. The 18 months before she died, I wasn't taking care of myself. I was taking care of her, which is right, which is what you do. But the body forgets how to function when you stop asking it to. He looked at the water. Chad's program was the first thing that made me feel like the person Elaine knew. Gumbo sat with this. I understand why you did it, he said. I know you do. Arnie looked at him. That doesn't make it go away. No, Gumbo said. It doesn't. They sat for a moment. The Osprey afternoon moved around them, the bird sounds, the light, the distant sound of a lawn mower somewhere in the community's east quadrant. You're going back to Cedar Key, Arnie said. Probably tomorrow. What's in Cedar Key? A boat, Gumbo said. A marina. A pelican who's going to be annoyed with me for being gone 3 days. Arnie looked at him. A pelican. His name is Pete. He lives on the dock piling outside my slip. He has opinions. Arnie looked at the retention pond. I had a dog for 12 years, he said. After Elaine died, I couldn't start over with a dog. The dog had been hers more than mine. He paused. I envy people who have something waiting for them. Gumbo said nothing. It didn't need a response. It needed the respect of not having a response. They sat in the quiet of the Arnie Lipscomb's lanai for another 5 minutes, and then Gumbo stood and said he had calls to make, which was true, and Arnie lifted a hand in the specific way people lifted a hand when they wanted to acknowledge a thing without performing the acknowledgement, and Gumbo went back to the guest unit. He called Vivian at 2. She picked up on the first ring, the same way she'd picked up every time, the alertness of a woman who had been waiting for calls. "Francine told me," Vivian said. "The embezzlement piece. The WA funds." "Yes," he said. "He was spending our neighbor's money on the drugs that killed him." She said it with the flat precision of someone who had organized the information and was delivering it organized. Not just on the drugs he was taking. On the inventory for the whole operation. "Yes," he said again. That's something Howard would find deeply embarrassing." She paused. He had very strong views about financial rectitude. He had a patient once who had been defrauding an insurance company, relatively minor case, and Howard dropped him. Wouldn't treat him. She paused. "The irony of it is going to land differently for different people in this community. The community is going to have a complicated few weeks," he said. "Communities always do," she said. "I've been watching communities for 50 years. They absorb things." She paused. "The question is what they absorb them into." He thought about that. "Gerald Fitch is going to want a clean championship record," he said. "The October final should probably be reviewed." "Gerald can speak to the WA board about that," she said. "That's a governance matter." A pause. "Has the board been notified?" "Francine is talking to Marlene Kovach as we speak." "Marlene is going to be. Marlene runs that board like a property management company. She's going to want everything documented and categorized and referred to the appropriate committee." She paused. "She'll handle it correctly. Efficiently and without warmth, but correctly." "That might be what's needed," Gumbo said. "Yes," Vivian said. "It might be." She was quiet for a moment. "The consent form." "Yes." "He knew the risk. He chose it." "Yes." She breathed. He could hear it, not distress, just the breath of someone living inside a specific fact. "He was always going to choose it," she said. "He chose risk his entire career. He chose the hard cases, the ones other surgeons wouldn't take. He chose them because he thought he could make a difference, and he thought the chance of making a difference was worth the risk of not making it." She paused. He applied that to himself. He decided he could handle the risk. "He may have been right that he could handle it," Gumbo said carefully. "The monitoring may have been inadequate. The risk may have been communicated in a way that was technically accurate and practically misleading. Those are things the malpractice attorney will work through." "Yes," she said. "But Howard also chose it. That's true simultaneously." "Yes," he said. "It is." She was quiet for a moment. "You've done what I hired you to do," she said. "I know what happened to Howard. I know why it happened. I know who's responsible and in what measure." She paused. "The last thing I need to know, the thing I didn't know I needed to know when I called Francine, is that Howard decided. He wasn't just a victim of someone else's decision. He participated in his own." "Yes," Gumbo said. That's a hard thing to hold," she said. "But it's his. It belongs to him. He made it." She paused. "I'd rather have it be his than have it be only Chad's. Does that make sense?" He thought about Arnie on the lanai, feeling like the person Elaine knew. He thought about Raymond Coates not using the walker. He thought about Howard Caswell winning the September final with the game he'd built from what Chad Barbieri had given him. "Yes," he said. "It makes sense." "Good," she said. "Send me your invoice." A pause. "And Mr. Malone." "Gumbo." Gumbo. Thank you for treating this like it mattered. It did matter, he said. He hung up. He sat at the guest unit desk with the composition book open to a page that had been filling up since Monday morning, and looked at what he'd built across 5 days of a retirement community in Osprey, showing him what it was. At the bottom of the last page he wrote, "Howard chose. That's his. The rest belongs to Webb and Chad, and the WA, and the 40 others, and their doctors and their attorneys, and whatever the DOE and the FDA decide to do with the building and the binder." He looked at it. Under it he wrote, "Vivian knows what she needed to know. Case is done." He closed the composition book. He went to find Marlene Kovach. The WA administrative office was on the north end of the community, a 2-room suite adjacent to the sales office that smelled like printer toner and the specific floral air freshener of people who spent a lot of time in a small space and had made a decision about it. Marlene Kovach was at her desk when he came in, and she looked at him with the measuring assessment of a woman who had been running a 600-unit wall board for 9 years and had developed strong opinions about people who arrived at her office without appointments. She was 64, trim, with the kind of organized efficiency that expressed itself in how her desk was arranged and how her calendar was managed, and how she looked at an unannounced visitor with the exact amount of attention required to determine what category of unannounced visitor they were. "Mr. Malone," she said. Francine had prepared the way. "Sit down." He sat. "Francine Dowd walked me through the financial analysis this morning," Marlene said. "I've spent the last 2 hours on the phone with our attorney and our accounting firm." She folded her hands on the desk. "The accounting firm is going to have a very uncomfortable conversation with their own risk management team." How long did they know? They're claiming they didn't know that the wellness program expense categorization appeared legitimate and within the board's general authorization for the wellness center. She paused. "Our attorney's preliminary view is that the accounting firm had a due diligence obligation to flag the variance for board discussion. Whether they failed that obligation in a way that creates liability for them is," she stopped. "That's a different conversation." "The $140,000 a year," he said. "The board is going to convene an emergency session Thursday morning. We'll be issuing a communication to all residents by end of business today, acknowledging a financial irregularity under investigation." She paused. "The specifics of the pharmaceutical program will be addressed separately, in coordination with whatever the DOE investigation produces." "The residents in the program," he said. 41 people who need to talk to their physicians immediately. That communication needs to happen today, separate from the financial notice." Marlene looked at him. "That communication requires us to disclose that the wellness program we've been operating has been delivering controlled substances through a physician relationship that we may or may not have authorized." "You didn't authorize it," he said. "You authorized a wellness program. What was operating inside that wellness program is something different." She looked at her folded hands. The community is going to be upset regardless of when they find out," he said. "They'll be more upset if they find out from the news rather than from you." He paused. "Marlene, 41 people are currently on pharmaceutical protocols that need to be medically managed. Today, if one of them has a cardiac event tonight because nobody told them to call their doctor." "I understand," she said. She said it with the flat authority of someone absorbing a serious point and acting on it. She picked up her phone. "I'm calling the attorney back." He stood. "The September championship bracket," he said. "Gerald Fitch will have thoughts." She looked at him with the expression of a woman who had 17 more serious problems than a pickleball championship bracket, and was aware that the bracket would nonetheless require her attention. "Gerald always has thoughts," she said. He left her to her phone call and walked back out into the Osprey afternoon, which was still doing what it had been doing. Blue, clear, warm, the kind of afternoon that made no promises and kept the ones it made. He went to pack. He was going home tomorrow, and the composition book was as full as it was going to get on this case, and Francine had what she needed, and Robles at Doe had the photographs and the statement, and Pete was on Deanne's cousin's screened porch in Chiefland with thoughts of his own. He called Renata from the lanai, while the gopher tortoise maintained its position on the retention pond bank with the consistency of something that had decided on a position and saw no reason to revise it. She picked up on the second ring. He could hear the island room kitchen behind her. Early prep, the specific sound of a Tuesday afternoon getting the restaurant ready for service. "Tomorrow," he said. "Late afternoon." "I'll tell Marco," she said. "He's been asking." "What's he made?" "Tonight. He's doing a whole roasted snook in the herb crust. He's been working on the crust for 2 weeks. Save me some." "I'll try," she said. "He's been feeding it to Tommy Hurd's crew as a test audience, and they keep eating all of it. Tell Tommy's crew to stand down." She laughed. The island room kitchen moved behind her. "How did it go?" He looked at the tortoise. At the retention pond. At the Seaview Palms afternoon, the courts visible in the distance with their lights coming on for the evening session, the players moving in the early evening light with whatever they had in their bodies, given, earned, taken, chosen. "Like it mattered," he said. "And like it didn't clean up all the way." "Florida," she said. "Florida," he said. "Come home," she said. He said he would. He sat on the lanai for a few more minutes after he hung up, in the specific warmth of a November afternoon that was doing what November afternoons in Southwest Florida did when they were being themselves, unhurried, golden, indifferent to the things that had happened in the week and the things that were going to happen in the weeks after. The tortoise sat on the bank. He sat on the lanai. Neither of them was going anywhere in the immediate future. That was fine. He had a pork shoulder to look forward to, and a boat to get back in the water, and a pelican with a grievance to attend to. The cases closed, and the cases didn't fully close, and tomorrow he'd drive north on US 41 and take the Sun Coast Parkway west and come off at Chiefland and pick up State Route 24 where the road made its decision and follow the decision to the end. The end was Cedar Key. Cedar Key was where he lived. He went inside to finish packing. Chapter 5. He drove back to Cedar Key on Wednesday. US 41 north through Sarasota and Manatee counties in the morning light. The Gulf occasionally visible to the west, between the commercial corridors and the subdivision entrances, and the billboard campaigns of a coast that had been selling itself since 1950 and had not exhausted the material. He stopped for gas in Bradenton and ate a breakfast sandwich at a place that had been there long enough to have regulars and was feeding them with the focused economy of a restaurant that had found its purpose and stuck with it. He called Francine at 9. "Chad is gone," she said before he said anything. It was not quite 8, and she was already at her desk and already on top of it, which was Francine. "Gone where?" "Tampa, as best anyone can determine." He called the Wellness Center's part-time administrative assistant at 6:45 this morning and told her he had a family emergency and would be out indefinitely. His apartment at a complex on Osprey Avenue, he rented separately from the community. The manager says his car is gone and the unit looks cleared out. She paused. He didn't take everything. Clothes and personal items, laptop, the obvious things. Left the furniture. Left the kitchen stuff. The storage building. The doe inspector arrived at Seaview Palms at 8 this morning. I've been told the building was found locked, and the inventory was as you described it. They're processing it now. She paused. Robles called me at 7:50 to confirm receipt of your photographs and statement. She said the binder matches your account. Did Chad take anything from the building before he left? Nothing visible. The inspector inventoried from your photographs. The binder is there. The pharmaceutical inventory is there. Either he panicked and ran without clearing it, or he calculated that taking the evidence would be a worse outcome than leaving it. She paused. I think he panicked. Gumbo thought about Chad Barbieri in his glass-walled office the day before with his hands on the desk and the spotlight off, and the flat question, "What do you want?" delivered by a man finding the edge of the situation and looking over it. He'd looked over it and decided to run rather than manage what was on the other side. Webb, he said. Webb is not running, Francine said. Webb has a practice, a building he owns, a staff of 6, a patient roster of 400. Webb retained a malpractice and criminal defense attorney yesterday afternoon, a firm in Sarasota that does exactly this kind of work and does it well. He issued a statement through the attorney this morning saying he is cooperating fully with regulatory authorities and is committed to the appropriate management of all current patients. She paused. The statement is also saying that the physician-patient protocols were implemented within the bounds of his clinical judgment and applicable guidelines, which is the legal position you stake out when you don't know yet how bad the exposure is. How bad is the exposure? Howard Caswell's exposure, the cardiac patient on a modified EPO protocol who died on a pickleball court, is significant. The malpractice piece depends on what the consent process actually delivered versus what it documented. If Howard signed a form without genuinely understanding the risk, the form is a mitigation, not a shield. She paused. The criminal piece, prescribing controlled substances outside appropriate clinical parameters, possible Medicare fraud in the billing, that's going to depend on what the FDA and DOE find when they go through all 41 patient records. They'll find more than Howard, Gumbo said. Almost certainly. Webb was running this across multiple properties. The Seaview Palms case is going to open doors into whatever he's been doing at the others. She paused. Robles mentioned 2 other communities in Sarasota and Charlotte counties that they're already aware of. He thought about what Kim Nakamura had told him at morning call. 3 communities. The coach network had noticed before the regulators had. Kim Nakamura, he said. The coach in Sarasota, who flagged this before Gerald did. She mentioned other coaches in similar communities who'd had the same concerns. I'll call her, Francine said. Those coaches are going to be useful to the Doe investigation as collateral witnesses. He passed a billboard advertising a retirement community with the tagline, "Your best chapter starts here," over an image of 2 people in their 60s playing pickleball in perfect form in perfect light, and thought about what the billboard's art director had intended and what the billboard was going to look like to people driving past it in 3 weeks when the Seaview Palms story was in the news. The WA financial piece, he said. Marlene Kovach's attorney has retained a forensic accounting firm. They're going in tomorrow to reconstruct the actual fund flows over the 22-month period. She paused. The preliminary read is that the variance ran through a vendor relationship. Chad had set up a supply company, an LLC, that the WA was paying for wellness program supplies. The supply company invoiced the WA, and the WA paid the invoices without the board seeing the underlying expense detail. He billed the WA for the drugs through a shell company, a supply LLC. Registered 6 months after he started at Seaview Palms. She paused. The LLC name is Coastal Wellness Solutions. Registered in Florida. Sole member, Chad Michael Barbieri. Gumbo drove. He thought about the $40,000 of pharmaceutical inventory in the climate-controlled storage building that Chad Barbieri had funded partly through program fees and partly through billing the community's own WA for the privilege of being subjected to an unauthorized pharmaceutical distribution operation. The criminal referral on the embezzlement, he said. The attorney has already contacted the Sarasota County State Attorney's Office, she said. Florida law on WA financial fraud is specific. There are criminal statutes that cover exactly this kind of vendor self-dealing. The fact that Chad has apparently fled is going to be noted. Apparently fled. He has a sister in Tampa. He may simply be visiting his sister in a moment of personal crisis. She said this with the flat tone of someone accurately characterizing what a defense attorney would argue. Whether he's visiting his sister or has left the state is going to become clear in the next 48 hours. Tampa PD has been alerted. Sarasota County Sheriff notified them as a courtesy. Nobody has a warrant yet. If the state attorney moves quickly on the embezzlement, that could change. She paused. Gumbo. Yeah. You did good work. The work isn't done. Your part of it is, she said. The rest of it is regulators and attorneys and forensic accountants. That's their part. A pause. Go get your boat out of the yard. He drove. He picked up Pete at Deanne's cousin's house in Chiefland at 2 in the afternoon. Deanne's cousin was named Ruth, and she was 67, and she had a screened porch that overlooked a half-acre yard. And she was standing at the screen door when Gumbo pulled in with the expression of a woman who had hosted a pelican for 6 days and had developed an informed position on the experience. He ate 11 fish, she said. I'll replace them, Gumbo said. I don't want fish. I want to understand why your pelican knows how to ring a doorbell. He learned from the one at the marina, he said. It plays La Cucaracha. Ruth looked at him. Mine plays Westminster chimes. She opened the screen door. He rang it every morning at 5:45. For 6 days. Pete was on the porch railing with the composed dignity of a creature that had been in an irregular situation and had managed it correctly and expected this to be acknowledged. He looked at Gumbo with one amber eye. Then he looked away, toward the yard, in the manner of something that had a grievance it would communicate through sustained indifference rather than direct engagement. Pete, Gumbo said. Pete looked at the yard. I know, Gumbo said. He put Pete in the travel crate with a fish from the cooler he'd brought, which Pete accepted with the minimal acknowledgement of a creature that was still processing the grievance, but understood that fish and grievance were not mutually exclusive, and drove the 41 miles back to Cedar Key on State Route 24 with Pete in the cargo area, making the occasional sound that communicated the ongoing nature of the situation. The severance package came off the hard at the boatyard Thursday morning. The yard crew handled the travel lift with the efficient competence of people who put boats in and took them out and put them back in on a schedule governed by the needs of the coast and the habits of boat owners. And when the hull settled back into the water at the yard's launch ramp and the travel lift backed away, the severance package sat in Cedar Key water again with the specific rightness of a thing returned to its proper medium. He motored the half-mile back to the marina at idle speed with the morning still early and the harbor in the low flat light of a November morning. The water the dark gray-green of deep tidal water before the sun got to it, the mullet breaking the surface in their random distributed way. Pete on the bow railing, expanding his wings against the cold morning air the way he did sometimes, Not for flight, just for the wingspan, just for the reminder that the wings were there. Deanne lifted a hand from the marina office window when he came into the channel. He tied off at slip 12 and cut the engine and sat in the quiet of the boat in the marina for a moment. He wrote in the composition book, severance package back in slip 12. Cedar Key. November. Under it, case closed. He looked at the 2 lines. He thought about Howard Caswell on the September championship court, moving the way the program had let him move, placing the ball where he needed to place it, beating a man who trained in Arizona 6'2", 6'1", knowing what he'd taken to get there, and having decided the knowing didn't change the wanting. He thought about Vivian watching from the sideline and not knowing. He thought about Arnie on his lanai saying, "I felt good. For the first time in 4 years, I felt like myself." He closed the composition book. Francine sent updates through the week. Thursday, the Doe inspector completed the Seaview Palms inventory. $43,800 of pharmaceutical product removed from the storage building. The pharmaceutical products had been acquired through a compounding pharmacy in Clearwater that was now also under investigation for filling prescriptions outside standard dispensing parameters. Webb's attorney issued a supplemental statement confirming that all current patients had been contacted and appropriate tapering protocols were being arranged through their primary care physicians. Friday, the Sarasota County State Attorney's Office opened a formal investigation into Chad Barbieri for grand theft and financial fraud in connection with the Coastal Wellness Solutions billing scheme. An arrest warrant had not yet been issued. Chad Barbieri had not returned to Sarasota. His sister in Tampa told a Sarasota County investigator that he had stayed with her Tuesday night and left Wednesday morning. He had not said where he was going. The following Tuesday, the FDA Office of Criminal Investigations executed a search warrant on Webb's Sarasota practice. 3 additional retirement community wellness programs with Webb connections were identified. Patient records for 217 individuals across all 4 communities were taken for review. Webb surrendered his Florida medical license voluntarily pending the investigation, which his attorney described as a good faith gesture and which the medical board accepted. The Tuesday after that, the Seaview Palms Law Board held a special session that the community's governing documents required to be open to residents. 240 residents attended, which was approximately 40% of the community's adult population, and which the community center's main meeting room had not been designed to hold. Marlene Kovach ran the meeting with the organized efficiency Vivian had described, efficient, correct, without warmth. The forensic accounting firm's preliminary findings were presented. The board voted to pursue civil recovery from Coastal Wellness Solutions, which had no remaining assets. The board voted to refer the matter to the state attorney, which was largely symbolic since the referral had already happened. The board voted to implement a new financial oversight protocol, requiring dual authorization for all vendor payments above $5,000. At the end of the open session, 3 residents stood to speak. 2 of them said things in the register of community members who felt betrayed by an institution they had trusted, which was the appropriate register and which Marlene received with the correct professional patience. The 3rd resident was Don Whitfield, 68, who said that the board's financial oversight failure was one thing and the pharmaceutical program was another, and the community had an obligation to distinguish between them because 41 adult residents had made informed choices about their own medical care, and those choices deserved to be treated with the respect appropriate to adult decision-making regardless of the regulatory framework around those choices. Nobody cheered. Nobody booed. The room received it in the complicated silence of a community that had agreed on some things and not agreed on others, and was going to be living with both for a while. The fourth speaker was Gerald Fitch, who requested formally that the September Pickleball Championship results be reviewed by the WA Athletic Committee in light of the information that had come to light regarding performance protocols used by certain participants. Marlene said the Athletic Committee would take the matter under advisement. Gerald sat down. Raymond Coates was not at the meeting. His physician had placed him on a supervised tapering protocol and recommended reduced physical activity during the transition period. He had not been on the courts for 3 weeks. His hip, according to Arnie, who had spoken to him Tuesday morning, was beginning to offer its previous opinions again. Vivian Caswell called on a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks after Gumbo had left Seaview Palms. He was on the stern of the severance package with the composition book and a Yingling and Pete on the piling, the November afternoon doing what it did, blue gold, salt warm, the harbor quiet in the post-tourist shoulder season when Cedar Key went back to being what it was when nobody was watching it be itself. The malpractice attorney, Vivian said. She thinks there's a viable case. Good, he said. The consent process was documented but inadequate by the standards she applies. Howard signed a form that used clinical language about risk without quantifying the risk in terms appropriate to a layperson. She paused. The attorney's position is that Howard's medical background cuts both ways. It may mean he could have understood more than a layperson, but it also means Webb should have given him physician-level detail rather than layperson-level disclosure. What does Webb's attorney say? Nothing useful, she said. Nothing they don't have to say. She paused. The malpractice carrier has been in contact. These things take time. Yes, he said. They do. I'm not looking for a large settlement, she said. I want the record to say what happened. I want Webb's record to reflect what happened. She paused. Howard would have cared about the record. He was a surgeon. He understood that the record was what remained after the decision. Yes, Gumbo said. She was quiet for a moment. He could hear the Seaview Palms community behind her, some ambient sound, a bird, distant court noise from whatever was happening on the pickleball courts. She was still there. She'd said when Francine had asked that she had no reason to leave. This was her community. These were her neighbors, and the community was going through something, and leaving during the something was not what she did. The new WA president, she said. Did Francine tell you? Tell me, he said. The board held elections last week. Marlene declined to seek another term. She said the oversight failure happened on her watch, and she took responsibility by stepping back. She paused. The new president is a man named Bernard Okafor. He's 68, former compliance officer for a financial services firm in Cleveland, has been at Seaview Palms for 2 years. A compliance officer. A compliance officer who ran on a platform of restored financial accountability and enhanced governance transparency, which everyone agreed with, and also on a platform of, let me find the exact language. He heard her pulling something up. A return to community values, grounded in authentic wellness, natural achievement, and age-appropriate recreational pursuits. What does that mean in practice? It means Bernard Okafor has proposed a comprehensive review of all community recreational programming. She paused. The proposals he has floated include restricting pickleball court access to a maximum of 2 hours per resident per day, implementing a mandatory cool-down protocol between court sessions for residents over 65, banning the practice of ball machine solo drilling because he considers it unsociable, and establishing a recreational wellness committee to evaluate all physical activities for appropriate risk calibration. Gumbo looked at the harbor. He's banning everything enjoyable, he said. He's proposing a framework for banning everything enjoyable, Vivian said. There's a difference, though the outcome may be similar. She paused. Gerald Fitch is already organizing a counter-coalition. He's calling it the Athletic Freedom Caucus. Another pause. Gerald has found a purpose. Gumbo thought about Gerald at the ball machine, working the backhand cross-court in the repetitive way of a man addressing a weakness. The competitive engine that had nowhere to go after Howard's death, finding a governance fight to power instead. How many members does the Athletic Freedom Caucus have? He said. Gerald says 43. She paused. Don Whitfield is a founding member, which has created an awkward situation, given that Don is also one of the 41 who was in the enhanced program. The Athletic Freedom Caucus founding member who was on the EPO protocol, Gumbo said. It's a complicated community, Vivian said. All communities are, he said. She was quiet for a moment. Bernard is not wrong about everything, she said. Some review of the recreational programming is appropriate. What happened at this community happened partly because there was no oversight structure for the wellness program. A man with a good pitch, and a physician collaborator, and a padlocked storage building ran an unauthorized pharmaceutical operation for 14 months without anyone asking serious questions. She paused. Oversight matters. Yes, he said. It does. But there's a difference between oversight and control, she said. Between accountability and the elimination of joy. She paused. Howard chose what he chose. I'm not going to say it was right. I'm not going to say it was wrong. I'm going to say he chose it, and it was his choice. And the thing I want for this community is not a Bernard Okafor reality where nobody is allowed to choose anything that might go wrong. She stopped. Howard would have hated that more than anything. Yes, Gumbo said. Probably. He was a thoracic surgeon, she said. He spent 39 years choosing things that could go wrong. Half the time they went right because he'd chosen them, and half the time she stopped. Half the time something else happened. But he was always choosing. He was never not choosing. Gumbo watched Pete on the piling. Pete had found a position he approved of, and was in it, still in the specific way of a creature that had finished its thinking, and was now simply being what it was in the place it was with the afternoon around it. Thank you for calling, he said. Thank you for taking the case seriously, she said. And for treating Howard seriously. Not as a victim only. As a man who made decisions. He was both, Gumbo said. Yes, she said. He was. A pause. Goodbye, Gumbo. Goodbye, Vivian. He set the phone on the stern table and opened the composition book to the last written page. He wrote, Vivian called. Case closed in the way cases close in Florida, which is not entirely. He looked at it. Webb surrendered his license. Chad is in Tampa or somewhere past Tampa. Bernard Okafor has banned the ball machine. Gerald has a caucus. Raymond's hip has opinions again. Arnie's specialist put him on a monitoring protocol and told him to come back in 3 months. He looked at the list. Under it he wrote, 41 people chose. One of them didn't survive the choosing. The rest are going to carry it in their own way. He closed the composition book. Renata appeared at the end of the dock at 5:15 with a covered dish and a bottle of white wine, and the specific, efficient grace of a woman who had been doing things in a kitchen for 20 years and carried everything with the same balance. He took the dish, and she stepped aboard, and he poured wine into 2 glasses that were not wine glasses, but were what the severance package had, and the wine didn't care. Marco Snook, he said, lifting the dish cover. Marco Snook, she said. He's been refining the crust situation all week. He says this is the version. He tasted it. Marco was right. It was the version. They ate on the stern with the November afternoon going to gold around them, the harbor doing its harbor things, Pete on the piling with his wings folded and his amber eyes reading the water for whatever the water was telling him. "How's the community?" Renata said. "In the process of becoming whatever it's going to be after," he said. "That takes time." "Everything takes time." "Yes." He looked at the harbor. "The new president is banning the ball machine." She looked at him. "Solo drilling practice," he said. "He finds it unsociable." She was quiet for a moment. "That seems like an overreaction." "There's a coalition forming," he said. "The Athletic Freedom Caucus." She looked at him again. This time, with the expression of someone determining whether the sentence she had just heard was a sentence she had actually heard. "The Athletic Freedom Caucus," she said. Gerald Fitch. 43 members. They met Tuesday. She looked at the harbor. She looked at the wine in her glass. She looked at Gumbo. "Florida," she said. "Florida," he said. She laughed. He laughed. Pete made the sound. The harbor moved around them, and the gold light went to amber, and then to the specific Cedar Key purple of an evening that was cooling toward the version of cold that Cedar Key called cold, which was 58 degrees, and felt like nothing after Columbus, but felt like something after the day and the week, and the case that was closed in the way cases closed in Florida, which was not entirely, which was never entirely, which was fine. The snook was good. The wine was good. The company was good. That was enough. And